Monday. My name's Isabel. Um, I just really like stories and reading, and I felt like during kind of the turbulent times that we're in at the moment, that might be a nice thing to share. So, welcome. Sit down, get cozy, light a candle if you like, grab some tea, um, and settle in. So, last week we read A Study in Scarlet, one of the Sherlock Holmes stories. I said at the end of that last stream that this week we'd be reading The Sign of the Four, which is another Sherlock Holmes story, but actually I thought that just to kind of get in the mood for Halloween tomorrow, instead we would read some of these Grimm's fairy tales, which is a collection of book tales and fairy tales. Oh, hello. Um, it's a collection of folk tales and fairy tales collected by the brothers Grimm, who are from Germany, all obviously translated into English from the original German. The Grimm brothers didn't actually write any of them themselves. They were just kind of collected stories that already existed through oral tradition at the time. But yeah, so um, I've marked a couple of them. You might be able to see from all my ribbons. I don't know how long or reading all of those is actually going to take. So if we reach the end of those and I haven't read one of your favourite Grimm's fairy tales, feel free to suggest it in the chat, and we'll see how long we stay on for. Yeah. Oh, I know some of you were worried about me last time, because I didn't have anything to drink for like 3 and a bit hours while we were streaming. I have actually got something to drink this time. You'll be happy to know. So yeah. So let's get into it, I guess. The first one we're going to read is called The Frog King, which is the inspiration behind a lot of Princess and the Frog type stories. But probably isn't the Princess and the Frog story that you typically have seen or heard before. So we'll get into it. The Frog King. In old times, when wishing still helped one, there lived a king whose daughters were all beautiful, but the youngest was so beautiful that the sun itself, which has seen so much, was astonished whenever it shone on her face. Close by the king's castle lay a great dark forest, and under an old lime tree in the forest was a well. And when the day was very warm, the king's child went out into the forest and sat down by the side of the cool fountain. And when she was dull, she took a golden ball and threw it up on high and caught it, and this ball was her favourite plaything. Now it so happened that on one occasion the princess's golden ball did not fall into the little hand which she was holding up for it, but onto the ground below, and rolled straight into the water. The king's daughter followed it with her eyes, but it vanished, and the well was deep, so deep that the bottom could not be seen. On this she began to cry, and cried louder and louder, and could not be comforted. As she thus lamented, one said to her, "What ails thee, king's daughter? Thou weepest so that even a stone would show pity." She looked around to the side from whence the voice came, and saw a frog stretching forth its thick, ugly head from the water. "Ah, old water splasher, is it thou?" said she. "I am weeping for my golden ball, which has fallen into the well." "Be quiet and do not weep," answered the frog. "I can help thee, but what wilt thou give me if I bring thy plaything up again?" "Whatever thou wilt have, dear frog," said she. "My clothes, my pearls and jewels, and even the golden crown which I am wearing." The frog answered, "I do not care for thy clothes, thy pearls and jewels, or thy golden crown. But if thou wilt love me, and let me be thy companion and playfellow, and sit by thee at thy little table, and eat off thy little golden plate, and drink out of thy little golden cup, and sleep in thy little bed, if thou wilt promise me this, I will go down below, and bring thee thy golden ball up again." "Oh yes," said she, "I promise thee all thou wishest, if thou wilt but bring my ball back again." She, however, thought, "How the silly frog does talk! He lives in the water with the other frogs, and croaks, and can be no companion to any human being." But the frog, when he had received this promise, put his head into the water and sank down, and in a short while came swimming up again with the ball in his mouth, and threw it on the grass. The king's daughter was delighted to see her pretty plaything once more, and picked it up and ran away with it. "Wait, wait," said the frog, "take me with thee. I can't run as thou canst." But what did it avail him to scream his croak, croak after her, as loudly as he could? She did not listen to it, but ran home and soon forgot the poor frog, who was forced to go back into his well again. The next day, when she had seated herself at table with the king and all the courtiers, and was eating from her little golden plate, something came creeping, splish splash, up the marble staircase, and when it had got to the top, it knocked at the door and cried, "Princess, youngest princess, open the door for me." She ran to see who was outside, but when she opened the door, there sat the frog in front of it. Then she slammed the door to in great haste, sat down to dinner again, and was quite frightened. The king saw plainly that her heart was beating violently, and said, "My child, what art thou so afraid of? Is there perchance a giant outside who wants to carry thee away?" "Ah, no," replied she, "it is no giant, but a disgusting frog." "What does a frog want with thee?" "Ah, dear father, yesterday I was at the forest, sitting by the well, playing. My golden ball fell into the water, and because I cried so, the frog brought it out again for me, and because I insisted so on it, I promised him he should be my companion. But I never thought he would be able to come out of his water, and now he is outside there and wants to come in to me." In the meantime, it knocked a second time and cried, "Princess, youngest princess, open the door for me. Dost thou not know what thou saidst to me yesterday by the cool waters of the fountain? Princess, youngest princess, open the door for me." Then said the king, "That which thou hast promised must thou perform. Go and let him in." She went and opened the door, and the frog hopped in and followed her, step by step, to her chair. There he sat and cried, "Lift me up beside thee." She delayed, until at last the king commanded her to do it. When the frog was once on the chair, he wanted to be on the table, and when he was on the table, he said, "Now, push thy little golden plate nearer to me, that we may eat together." She did this, but it was easy to see that she did not do it willingly. The frog enjoyed what he ate, but almost every mouthful she took choked her. At length he said, "I have eaten and am satisfied. Now I am tired. Carry me to thy little room and make thy little silken bed ready, and we will both lie down and go to sleep." The king's daughter began to cry, for she was afraid of the cold frog, which she did not like to touch, and which was now to sleep in her pretty, clean little bed. But the king grew angry and said, "He who helped thee when thou wert in trouble ought not afterwards to be despised by thee." So she took hold of the frog with 2 fingers, carried him upstairs, and put him in a corner. But when she was in bed, he crept to her and said, "I am tired. I want to sleep as well as thou. Lift me up, or I will tell thy father." Then she was terribly angry, and took him up and threw him with all her might against the wall. Thou wilt be quiet, odious frog," said she. But when he fell down, he was no frog, but a king's son, with beautiful kind eyes. He, by her father's will, was now her dear companion and husband. Then he told her how he had been bewitched by a wicked witch, and how no one could have delivered him from the well but herself, and that tomorrow they would go together into his kingdom. Then they went to sleep, and next morning when the sun awoke them, a carriage came driving up with 8 white horses, which had white ostrich feathers on their heads, and were harnessed with golden chains, and behind stood the young king's servant, Faithful Henry. Faithful Henry had been so unhappy when his master was changed into a frog that he had caused 3 iron bands to be laid around his heart, lest it should burst with grief and sadness. The carriage was to conduct the young king into his kingdom. Faithful Henry helped them both in, and placed himself behind again, and was full of joy because of this deliverance. And when they had driven a part of the way, the king's son heard a cracking behind them, as if something had broken. So he turned round and cried, "Henry, the carriage is breaking." "No, master, it is not the carriage. It is a band from my heart, which was put there in my great pain when you were a frog and imprisoned in the well." Again and once again, while they were on their way, something cracked, and each time the king's son thought the carriage was breaking, but it was only the bands which were springing from the heart of Faithful Henry, because his master was set free and was happy. Not quite the same as the usual Princess and the Frog story, I guess. Also, I was surprised when I first read it, because, there's no kissing the frog turns him into a prince thing. She just slams him against a wall, which apparently will do it. Alright, so next we have Cinderella. The wife of a rich man fell sick, and as she felt that her end was drawing near, she called her only daughter to her bedside and said, "Dear child, be good and pious, and then the good God will always protect thee, and I will look down on thee from heaven and be near thee." Thereupon she closed her eyes and departed. Every day the maiden went out to her mother's grave and wept, and she remained pious and good. When winter came, the snow spread a white sheet over the grave, and when the spring sun had drawn it off again, the man had taken another wife. The woman had brought 2 daughters into the house, who were beautiful and fair of face, but vile and black of heart. Now began a bad time for the poor stepchild. "Is the stupid goose to sit in the parlour with us?" said they. "He who wants to eat bread must earn it. Out with the kitchen wench." They took her pretty clothes away from her, put an old grey bedgown on her, and gave her wooden shoes. "Just look at the proud princess, how decked out she is," they cried and laughed, and led her into the kitchen. There she had to do hard work from morning till night, get up before daybreak, carry water, light fires, cook, and wash. Besides this, the sisters did her every imaginable injury. They mocked her and emptied her peas and lentils into the ashes, so that she was forced to sit and pick them out again. In the evening, when she had worked till she was weary, and she had no bed to go to, but had to sleep by the fireside in the ashes. And as on that account she always looked dusty and dirty, they called her Cinderella. It happened that the father was once going to the fair, and he asked his 2 stepdaughters what he should bring back for them. "Beautiful dresses," said one. "Pearls and jewels," said the other. "And thou, Cinderella," said he, "what wilt thou have?" "Father, break off for me the first branch which knocks against your hat on your way home." So he bought beautiful dresses, pearls, and jewels for his 2 stepdaughters, and on his way home, as he was riding through a green thicket, a hazel twig brushed against him and knocked off his hat. Then he broke off the branch and took it with him. When he reached home, he gave his stepdaughters the things which they had wished for, and to Cinderella he gave the branch from the hazel bush. Cinderella thanked him, went to her mother's grave, and planted the branch on it, and wept so much that the tears fell down on it and watered it. It grew, however, and became a handsome tree. Twice a day Cinderella went and sat beneath it, wept and prayed, and a little white bird always came on the tree, and if Cinderella expressed a wish, the bird threw down to her what she had wished for. It happened, however, that the king appointed a festival, which was to last 3 days, and to which all the beautiful young girls in the country were invited, in order that his son might choose himself a bride. When the 2 stepsisters heard that they too were to appear among the number, they were delighted, called Cinderella, and said, "Comb our hair for us, brush our shoes, and fasten our buckles, for we are going to the festival at the king's palace." Cinderella obeyed, but wept, because she too would have liked to go with them to the dance, and begged her stepmother to allow her to do so. "Thou go, Cinderella," said she. "Thou art dusty and dirty, and wouldst go to a festival. Thou hast no clothes and shoes, and yet wouldst dance." As, however, Cinderella went on asking, the stepmother at last said, "I have emptied a dish of lentils into the ashes for thee. If thou hast picked them out again in 2 hours, thou shalt go with us." The maiden went through the back door into the garden, and called, "You tame pigeons, you turtle doves, and all you birds beneath the sky, come and help me pick the good into the pot, and the bad into the crop." Then 2 white pigeons came in by the kitchen window, and afterwards the turtle doves, and at last all the birds beneath the sky, came whirring and crowding in, and alighted amongst the ashes. And the pigeons nodded their heads, and began to pick, 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 and the rest also to pick, 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 and gathered all the good grains into the dish. Hardly had 1 hour passed before they had finished, and all flew out again. Then the girl took the dish to her stepmother, and was glad, and believed that now she would be allowed to go with them to the festival. But the stepmother said, "No, Cinderella, thou hast no clothes, and thou canst not dance. Thou wouldst only be laughed at." And as Cinderella wept at this, the stepmother said, "If thou canst pick 2 dishes of lentils out of the ashes for me in 1 hour, thou shalt go with us." And she thought to herself, that most certainly she cannot do. When the stepmother had emptied the 2 dishes of lentils among the ashes, the maiden went through the back door into the garden, and cried, "You tame pigeons, you turtle doves, and all you birds beneath the sky, come and help me pick the good into the pot, and the bad into the crop." Then 2 white pigeons came in by the kitchen window, and afterwards the turtle doves, and at length all the birds beneath the sky came whirring and crowding in, and alighted again amongst the ashes. And the doves nodded with their heads, and began pick, 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 and the others began also pick, 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 and gathered all the good seeds into the dishes, and before half an hour was over, then the maiden carried the dishes to the stepmother, and was delighted, and believed that she might now go with them to the festival. But the stepmother said, "All this will not help thee. Thou goest not with us, for thou hast no clothes, and canst not dance, and we should be ashamed of thee." On this she turned her back on Cinderella, and hurried away with her two proud daughters. As no one was now at home, Cinderella went to her mother's grave beneath the hazel tree, and cried, "Shiver and quiver, little tree, silver and gold throw down over me." Then the bird threw a gold and silver dress down to her, and slippers embroidered with silk and silver. She put on the dress with all speed, and went to the festival. Her stepsisters and the stepmother, however, did not know her, and thought she must be a foreign princess, for she looked so beautiful in the golden dress. They never once thought of Cinderella, and believed that she was sitting at home in the dirt, picking lentils out of the ashes. The prince went to meet her, took her by the hand and danced with her. He would dance with no other maiden, and never left loose of her hand, and if anyone else came to invite her, he said, "This is my partner." She danced till it was evening, and then she wanted to go home. But the king's son said, "I will go with thee and bear thee company," for he wished to see to whom the beautiful maiden belonged. She escaped from him, however, and sprang into a pigeon house. The king's son waited until her father came, and then he told him that the stranger maiden had leapt into the pigeon house. The old man thought, "Can it be Cinderella?" And they had to bring him an axe and a pickaxe, that he might hew the pigeon house to pieces. But no one was inside it. When they got home, Cinderella lay in her dirty clothes amongst the ashes, and a dim little oil lamp was burning on the mantelpiece. Cinderella had jumped quickly down from the back of the pigeon house, and had run to the little hazel tree, and there she had taken off her beautiful clothes and laid them on the grave, and the bird had taken them away again, and then she had placed herself in the kitchen amongst the ashes in her grey gown. Next day, when the festival began afresh, and her parents and the stepsister had gone once more, Cinderella went to the hazel tree, and said, "Shiver and quiver, little tree, silver and gold throw down over me." When the bird threw down a much more beautiful dress than on the preceding day. And when Cinderella appeared at the festival in this dress, everyone was astonished at her beauty. The king's son had waited until she came, and instantly took her by the hand and danced with no one but her. When others came and invited her, he said, "This is my partner." When evening came, she wished to leave, and the king's son followed her and wanted to see into which house she went, but she sprang away from him and into the garden behind the house. Therein stood a beautiful tall tree on which hung the most magnificent pears. She clambered so nimbly between the branches, like a squirrel, that the king's son did not know where she had gone. He waited until her father came and said to him, "The stranger has escaped from me, and I believe she has climbed up the pear tree." The father thought, "Can it be Cinderella?" and had an axe brought and cut the tree down, but no one was on it. And when they got into the kitchen, Cinderella lay there amongst the ashes, as usual, for she had jumped down on the other side of the tree, and had taken the beautiful dress to the bird on the little hazel tree, and had put on her grey gown. On the third day, when the parents and sisters had gone away, Cinderella once more went to her mother's grave, and said to the little tree, "Shiver and quiver, little tree, silver and gold throw down over me." And now the bird threw down on her a dress which was more splendid and magnificent than any she had yet had, and the slippers were golden. And when she went to the festival in the dress, no one knew how to speak for astonishment. The king's son danced with her only, and if anyone invited her to dance, he said, "This is my partner." When evening came, Cinderella wished to leave, and the king's son was anxious to go with her, but she escaped from him so quickly that he could not follow. The king's son had, however, used a stratagem, and had caused the whole staircase to be smeared with pitch, and there, when she ran down, had the maiden's left slipper remained sticking. The king's son picked it up, and it was small and dainty and all golden. Next morning he went with it to the father, and said to him, "No one shall be my wife but she whose foot this golden slipper fits." Then were the two sisters glad, for they had pretty feet. The eldest went with the shoe into her room, and wanted to try it on, and her mother stood by. But she could not get her big toe into it, and the shoe was too small for her. Then her mother gave her a knife, and said, "Cut the toe off. When thou art queen, thou wilt have no more need to go on foot." The maiden cut the toe off, forced the foot into the shoe, swallowed the pain, and went out to the king's son. Then he took her on his horse as his bride, and rode away with her. They were, however, obliged to pass the grave, and there on the hazel tree sat the two pigeons, and cried, turn and peep, there's blood within the shoe. The shoe is too small for her, the true bride waits for you." Then he looked at her foot, and saw how the blood was streaming from it, He turned his horse round and took the false bride home again, and said she was not the true one, and that her other sister was to put the shoe on. Then this then this one went into her chamber and got her toes safely into the shoe, but her heel was too large. So her mother gave her a knife and said, "Cut a bit off thy heel. When thou art queen thou wilt have no more need to go on foot." The maiden cut a bit off her heel, forced her foot into the shoe, swallowed the pain, and went out to the king's son. He took her on his horse as his bride, rode away with her. But when they passed by the hazel tree, two little pigeons sat on it and cried, "Turn and peep, turn and peep, there's blood within the shoe. The shoe is too small for her. Your true bride waits for you." He looked down at her foot and saw how the blood was running out of her shoe, and how it had stained her white stocking. Then he turned his horse and took the false bride home again. "This is also not the right one," said he. "Have you no other daughter?" "No," said the man. "There is still a little stunted kitchen wench, which my late wife left behind her, but she cannot possibly be the bride." The king's son said he was to send her up to him, but the mother answered, "Oh no, she is much too dirty, she cannot show herself." He absolutely insisted on it, and Cinderella had to be called. She first washed her hands and face clean, and then went and bowed down before the king's son, who gave her the golden shoe. Then she seated herself on a stool, drew her foot out of the heavy wooden shoe, and put it into the slipper, which fitted like a glove. And when she rose up and the king looked on her face, he recognized the beautiful maiden who had danced with him, and cried, "This is the true bride." The stepmother and the two sisters were terrified, and became pale with rage. He, however, took Cinderella on his horse, and rode away with her. As they passed by the hazel tree, the two white doves cried, turn and peep, no blood is in the shoe. The shoe is not too small for her, the true bride rides with you." And when they had cried that, the two came flying down and placed themselves on Cinderella's shoulders, one on the right and the other on the left, and remained sitting there. When the wedding with the king's son had to be celebrated, the two false sisters came and wanted to get into favour with Cinderella and share her good fortune. When the betrothed couple went to the church, the elder was at the right side and the younger at the left, and the pigeons pecked out one eye of each of them. Afterwards, as they came back, the elder was at the left and the younger at the right, and then the pigeons pecked out the other eye of each, and thus for their wickedness and falsehood they were punished with blindness as long as they lived. A lot more brutal than Disney's Cinderella. I'm not entirely sure pecking out people's eyes is a justified punishment for being a bit mean, but medieval Germany, I guess. So I'm gonna take a little break and have some tea. And then we're gonna start on Rapunzel. There were once a man and woman who had long in vain wished for a child. At length the woman hoped that God was about to grant her desire. These people had a little window at the back of their house, from which a splendid garden could be seen, which was full of the most beautiful flowers and herbs. It was, however, surrounded by a high wall, and no one dared go into it because it belonged to an enchantress, who had great power and was dreaded by all the world. One day a woman was standing by this window, and looking down into the garden, when she saw a bed which was planted with the most beautiful rampion. And it looked so fresh and green that she longed for it, and had the greatest desire to eat some. This desire increased every day, and as she knew that she could not get any of it, she quite pined away, and looked pale and miserable. Then her husband was alarmed, and asked, "What aileth thee, dear wife?" "Ah," she replied, "if I can't get some of the rampion, which is in the garden beside our house, to eat, I shall die." The man, who loved her, thought, "Sooner than let my wife die, bring her some of the rampion thyself, let it cost thee what it will." In the twilight of the evening, he clambered down over the wall into the garden of the enchantress, hastily clutched a handful of rampion, and took it to his wife. She at once made herself a salad of it, and ate it with much relish. She, however, liked it so much, so very much, that the next day she longed for it 3 times as much as before. If he was to have any rest, her husband must once more descend into the garden. In the gloom of evening, therefore, he let himself down again, but when he had clambered down the wall he was terribly afraid, for he saw the enchantress standing before him. "How canst thou dare," said she with an angry look, "to descend into my garden and steal my rampion like a thief? Thou shalt suffer for it." Ah, answered he, let mercy take the place of justice. I only made up my mind to do it out of necessity. My wife saw your rampion from the window, and felt such a longing for it that she would have died if I had not got some to eat. Then the enchantress allowed her anger to be softened, and said to him, If the case be as thou sayest, I will allow thee to take away with thee as much rampion as thou wilt. Only I make one condition. Thou must give me the child which thy wife will bring into the world. It shall be well treated, and I will care for it like a mother. The man in his horror consented to everything, and when the woman was brought to bed, the enchantress appeared at once, gave the child the name of Rapunzel, and took it away with her. Rapunzel grew into the most beautiful child beneath the sun. When she was 12 years old, the enchantress shut her into a tower, which lay in a forest, and had neither stairs nor door, but quite at the top was a little window. When the enchantress wanted to go in, she placed herself beneath it, and cried, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down thy hair to me. Rapunzel had magnificent long hair, fine as spun gold, and when she heard the voice of the enchantress, she unfastened her braided tresses, wound them round one of the hooks of the window above, and then the hair fell 20 ells down, and the enchantress climbed up by it. After a year or two, it came to pass that the king's son rode through the forest and went by the tower. Then he heard a song, which was so charming that he stood still and listened. This was Rapunzel, who in her solitude passed her time in letting her sweet voice resound. The king's son wanted to climb up to her, and looked for a door of the tower, but none was to be found. He rode home, but the singing had so deeply touched his heart that every day he went out into the forest and listened to it. Once, when he was thus standing beneath a tree, he saw that an enchantress came there, and heard how she cried, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down thy hair. Then Rapunzel let down the braids of her hair, and the enchantress climbed up to her. If that is the ladder by which one mounts, I will for once try my fortune, said he. And the next day, when it began to grow dark, he went to the tower and cried, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down thy hair. Immediately the hair fell down, and the king's son climbed up. At first Rapunzel was terribly frightened when a man such as her eyes had never yet beheld came to her. But the king's son began to talk to her quite like a friend, and told her that his heart had been so stirred that it had left him to have no rest, and that he had been forced to see her. Then Rapunzel lost her fear, and when he asked her if she would take for him, when he asked her if she would take him for a husband, and she saw that he was young and handsome, she thought, he will love me more than great old Dame Gothel does. And she said yes, and laid her hand in his. She said, I will willingly go away with thee, but I do not know how to get down. Bring with thee a skein of silk every time thou comest, and I will weave a ladder with it, and when that is ready I will descend, and thou wilt take me on thy horse. They agreed that until that time he should come to her every evening, but the old woman came by day. The enchantress remarked nothing of this, until once Rapunzel said to her, Tell me, Dame Gothel, how it happens that you are so much heavier for me to draw up than the young king's son. He is with me in a moment. Ah, thou wicked child, cried the enchantress. What do I hear thee say? I thought I had separated thee from all the world, and yet thou hast deceived me. In her anger, she clutched Rapunzel's beautiful tresses, wrapped them twice round her left hand, seized a pair of scissors with the right, and snip, snap, they were cut off, and the lovely braids lay on the ground, and she was so pitiless that she took poor Rapunzel into a desert, where she had to live in great grief and misery. On the same day, however, that she had cast out Rapunzel, the enchantress in the evening fastened the braids of hair which she had cut off to the hook of the window, and when the king's son came and cried, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down thy hair, she let the hair down. The king's son ascended, but he did not find his dearest Rapunzel above, but the enchantress, who gazed at him with wicked and venomous looks. Aha! She cried mockingly. Thou wouldst fetch thy dearest, but the beautiful bird sits no longer singing in the nest. The cat has got it, and will scratch out thy eyes as well. Rapunzel is lost to thee. Thou wilt never see her more. The king's son was beside himself with pain, and in his despair he leapt down from the tower. He escaped with his life, but the thorns into which he fell pierced his eyes. Then he wandered quite blind about the forest, ate nothing but roots and berries, and did nothing but lament and weep over the loss of his dearest wife. Thus he roamed about in misery for some years, and at length came to the desert where Rapunzel, with the twins to which she had given birth, a boy and a girl, lived in wretchedness. He heard a voice that seemed so familiar to him that he went towards it, and when he approached, Rapunzel knew him, and fell on his neck and wept. 2 of her tears wetted his eyes, and they grew clear again, and he could see with them as before. He led her to his kingdom, where he was joyfully received, and they lived for a long time afterwards, happy and contented. This is honestly one of my favorite Grimm stories as well. I will absolutely read 12 Dancing Princesses. I think I might have it marked, but if I don't, I will read it after these ones. Um, I like that that's like one of the only original stories that actually does have a happy ending, even though it's much more violent in between than we normally hear about. Yeah, so next one up is Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, there was a dear little girl who was loved by everyone who looked at her, but most of all by her grandmother, and there was nothing that she would not have given to the child. Once she gave her a little cap of red velvet, which suited her so well that she would never wear anything else, so that she was always called Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother said to her, "Come, Little Red Riding Hood, here is a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is ill and weak, and they will do her good. Set out before it gets hot, and when you are going, walk nicely and quietly, and do not run off the path, or you may fall and break the bottle, and then your grandmother will get nothing. And when you go into her room, don't forget to say good morning, and don't peep into every corner before you do it." "I will take great care," said Little Red Riding Hood to her mother, and gave her hand on it. The grandmother lived out in the wood, half a league from the village, and just as Little Red Riding Hood entered the wood, a wolf met her. Red Riding Hood did not know what a wicked creature he was, and was not at all afraid of him. "Good day, Little Red Riding Hood," said he. "Thank you, kindly wolf. Whither away so early, Little Red Riding Hood?" "To my grandmother's." "And what have you got in your apron?" "Cake and wine. Yesterday was baking day, so poor sick grandmother is to have something good to make her stronger." "Where does your grandmother live, Little Red Riding Hood?" "A good quarter of a league farther in the wood. Her house stands under the three large oak trees. The nut trees are just below. You surely must know it," replied Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf thought to himself, "What a tender young creature! What a nice plump mouthful! She will be better to eat than the old woman. I must act craftily so as to catch both." So he walked for a short time by the side of Little Red Riding Hood, and then he said, "See, Little Red Riding Hood, how pretty the flowers are about here. Why do you not look around? I believe too that you do not hear how sweetly the birds are singing. You walk gravely along, as if you were going to school, while everything else out here in the wood is merry." Little Red Riding Hood raised her eyes, and when she saw the sunbeams dancing here and there through the trees, and pretty flowers growing everywhere, she thought, "Suppose I take my grandmother a fresh nosegay. That would please her too. It is so early in the day that I shall still get there in good time." And so she ran from the path into the wood to look for flowers. Whenever she had picked one, she fancied that she saw a still prettier one farther on, and ran after it, and so got deeper and deeper into the wood. Meanwhile, the wolf ran straight to the grandmother's house and knocked at the door. "Who's there?" "Little Red Riding Hood," replied the wolf. "She's bringing cake and wine. Open the door." "Lift the latch," called out the grandmother. "I am too weak and cannot get up." The wolf lifted the latch. The door flew open, and without saying a word, he went straight to the grandmother's bed and devoured her. Then he put on her clothes, dressed himself in her cap, laid himself in bed and drew the curtains. Little Red Riding Hood, however, had been running about picking flowers, and when she had gathered so many that she could carry no more, she remembered her grandmother, and set out on her way to her. She was surprised to find the cottage door standing open, and when she went into the room, she had such a strange feeling that she said to herself, "Oh dear, how uneasy I feel today, and at other times I like being with grandmother so much." She called out, "Good morning," but received no answer, so she went to the bed and drew back the curtains, and there lay her grandmother with a cap pulled far over her face and looking very strange. "Oh, grandmother," she said, "what big ears you have!" "The better to hear you with, my child," was the reply. "But, grandmother, what big eyes you have!" she said. "The better to see you with, my dear." "But, grandmother, what large hands you have!" "The better to hug you with." "Oh, but, grandmother, what a terrible big mouth you have!" "The better to eat you with." And scarcely had the wolf said this, than with one bound he was out of bed and swallowed up Red Riding Hood. When the wolf had appeased his appetite, he lay down again in bed, fell asleep, and began to snore very loudly. The huntsman was just passing the house, and thought to himself, "How the old woman is snoring! I must just see if she wants anything." So he went into the room, and when he came to the bed, he saw that the wolf was lying in it. "Do I find thee here, thou old sinner?" said he. "I have long sought thee." Then, just as he was going to fire at him, it occurred to him that the wolf might have devoured the grandmother, and that she might still be saved. So he did not fire, but took a pair of scissors and began to cut open the stomach of the sleeping wolf. When he had made 2 snips, he saw Little Red Riding Hood shining. When he made 2 snips more, and the little girl sprang out, crying, "Ah, how frightened I have been! How dark it was inside the wolf!" And after that the aged grandmother came out alive also, but scarcely able to breathe. Red Riding Hood, however, quickly fetched great stones, with which they filled the wolf's body, and when he awoke and wanted to run away, but the stones were so heavy that he fell down at once and fell dead. Then all 3 were delighted. The huntsman drew off the wolf's skin and went home with it. Grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine which Red Riding Hood had brought, and revived. But Red Riding Hood thought to herself, "As long as I live, I will never by myself leave the path, to run into the wood, when my mother has forbidden me to do so." It is also related that once when Red Riding Hood was again taking cakes to the old grandmother, another wolf spoke to her, and tried to entice her from the path. Red Riding Hood, however, was on her guard, and went straight forward on her way, and told her grandmother that she had met the wolf, and that he had said good morning to her, but with such a wicked look in his eyes, that if she had not been on the public road, she was certain he would have eaten her up. "Well," said the grandmother, "we will shut the door, that he may not come in." Soon afterwards the wolf knocked, and cried, "Open the door, grandmother. I am Little Red Riding Hood, and I am fetching you some cakes." But they did not speak, or open the door. So the greybeard stole twice or thrice round the house, and at last jumped on the roof, intending to wait until Red Riding Hood went home in the evening, and then to steal after her and devour her in the darkness. But the grandmother saw what was in his thoughts. In front of the house was a great stone trough, and so she said to the child, "Take the pail, Red Riding Hood. I made some sausages yesterday, so carry the water in which I boiled them to the trough." Red Riding Hood carried until the great trough was quite full. Then the smell of sausages reached the wolf, and he sniffed and peeped down, and at last stretched out his neck so far that he could no longer keep his footing, and began to slip, and slipped down from the roof straight into the great trough, and was drowned. But Red Riding Hood went joyously home, and never did anything to harm anyone. Ah, got pages stuck together. Cool. It was kind of an abrupt ending, but there we go, I guess. Okay, so we've got 3 more left, and it's only 8 o'clock, so I feel like I'm just going to take requests after that. I'm not sure. The 12 Dancing Princesses isn't one of the ones I have marked, so I'll just read that one after I'm done with these. But next, we have Rumpelstiltskin. Once there was a miller who was poor, but who had a beautiful daughter. Now it happened that he had to go and speak to the king, and in order to make himself appear important, he said to him, "I have a daughter who can spin straw into gold." The king said to the miller, "That is an art which pleases me well. So, as you say, bring her tomorrow to my palace, and I will try what she can do." And when the girl was brought to him, he took her into a room which was quite full of straw, gave her a spinning wheel and a reel to work, and if by tomorrow morning early you have not spun this straw into gold during the night, you must die. Thereupon he himself locked up the room and left her in it alone. So there sat the poor miller's daughter, and for the life of her could not tell what to do. She had no idea how straw could be spun into gold, and she grew more and more miserable until at last she began to weep. But all at once the door opened, and in came a little man, and said, "Good evening, Mistress Miller. Why are you crying so?" "Alas," answered the girl, "I have to spin straw into gold, and I do not know how to do it." "What will you give me," said the mannikin, "if I do it for you?" "My necklace," said the girl. The little man took the necklace, seated himself in front of the wheel, and whir, 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 3 turns, and the reel was full. And then he put another on, and whir, 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 3 times round, and the second was full too. And so it went on until the morning, when all the straw was spun and all the reels were full of gold. By daybreak the king was already there, and when he saw the gold he was astonished and delighted, but his heart became only more greedy. He had the miller's daughter taken into another room full of straw, which was much larger, and commanded her to spin that also in one night, if she valued her life. The girl knew not how to help herself, and was crying, when the door opened again, and the little man appeared, and said, "What will you give me if I spin that straw into gold for you?" "The ring on my finger," answered the girl. The little man took the ring, and again began to turn the wheel, and by morning had spun all the straw into glittering gold. The king rejoiced beyond measure at the sight, but still he had not gold enough, and he had the miller's daughter taken into a still larger room full of straw, and said, "You must spin this too in the course of this night, but if you succeed you shall be my wife." Even if she be a miller's daughter, thought he, I could not find a richer wife in the whole world. When the girl was alone, the mannikin came again for the third time, and said, "What will you give me if I spin the straw for you this time also?" "I have nothing left that I could give," answered the girl. "Then promise me, if you should become queen, your first child." Who knows whether that will ever happen, thought the miller's daughter, and not knowing how else to help herself in this strait, she promised the mannikin what he wanted, and for that he once more span the straw into gold. And when the king came in the morning, and found all as he had wished, he took her hand in marriage, and the pretty miller's daughter became a queen. A year after, she had a beautiful child, and she never gave a thought to the mannikin, but suddenly he came into her room, and said, "Now give me what you have promised." The queen was horror-struck, and offered the mannikin all the riches of the kingdom if he would leave her child alone. But the mannikin said, "No, something that is living is dearer to me than all the treasures in the world." Then the queen began to weep and cry, so that the mannikin pitied her. "I will give you 3 days' time," said he. "If by that time you find out my name, then shall you keep your child." So the queen thought the whole night of all the names that she had ever heard, and then she sent a messenger over the country to inquire far and wide for any other names that there might be. When the mannikin came the next day, she began with Caspar, Melchior, Balthazar, and said all the names she knew, one after another. But to every one the little man said, "That is not my name." On the second day she had inquiries made in the neighbourhood as to the names of the people there, and she repeated to the mannikin the most uncommon and curious, "Perhaps your name is Shortribs, or Sheepshanks, or Laceleg," but always he answered, "That is not my name." On the third day the messenger came back again, and said, "I have not been able to find a single new name, but as I came to a high mountain at the end of the forest, where the fox and the hare bid each other good night, there I saw a little house, and before the house a fire was burning, and round about the fire quite a ridiculous little man was jumping. He hopped upon one leg, and shouted, 'Today I bake, tomorrow brew, the next I'll have the young queen's child. Ha! Glad I am that no one knew that Rumpelstiltskin am I styled.' You may think how glad was the queen when she heard the name. And when soon afterwards the little man came in and asked, 'Now, mistress queen, what is my name?' At first she said, 'Is your name Conrad?' 'No.' 'Is your name Harry?' 'No.' 'Perhaps your name is Rumpelstiltskin?' 'The devil has told you that! The devil has told you that!' cried the little man, and in his anger he plunged his right foot so deep into the earth that his whole leg went in, and then in rage he pulled at his left leg so hard with both hands that he tore himself in two. Because that's how physics and biology work. Stay in school, folks. You will not write ridiculous stories. Oh, hey everyone. There's more people in the chat now. Hey Callum. Hey Claire. Alright. Actually, I'm gonna have some tea because my voice is getting tired again. Also, my mug has gnomes on it. I felt like it was particularly appropriate for reading folk stories. I don't know why. I just did. Okay. Snow White. There was once a poor widow who lived in a lonely cottage, and in front of the cottage was a garden wherein stood 2 rose trees, one of which bore white and the other red roses. She had 2 children who were like the 2 rose trees, and one was called Snow White and the other Rose Red. They were as good and happy, as busy and cheerful as ever 2 children in the world were. Only Snow White was more quiet and gentle than Rose Red. Rose Red liked better to run about in the meadows and fields, seeking flowers and catching butterflies, but Snow White sat at home with her mother, and helped her with her housework, and read to her when there was nothing to do. The 2 children were so fond of each other that they had always held each other by the hand when they went out together, and when Snow White said, "We will not leave each other," Rose Red answered, "Never so long as we live." And their mother would add, "What one has she must also share with the other." They often ran about the forest alone and gathered red berries, and no beasts did them any harm, but came close to them trustfully. The little hare would eat the cabbage leaf out of their hands, and the roe grazed by their side, and the stag leapt merrily by them, and the birds sat still upon the boughs and sang whatever they knew. No mishap overtook them. If they had stayed out too late in the forest, and night came on, they laid themselves down near one another upon the moss, and slept until morning came, and their mother knew this and had no distress on their account. Once, when they had spent the night in the wood, and the dawn had roused them, they saw a beautiful child in a shining white dress sitting near their bed. He got up and looked quite kindly at them, but said nothing and went away into the forest. And when they looked round, they found that they had been sleeping quite close to a precipice, and would certainly have fallen into it in the darkness if they had gone only a few paces further. And their mother told them that it must have been an angel who watches over good children. Snow White and Rose Red kept their mother's little cottage so neat that it was a pleasure to look inside it. In the summer, Rose Red took care of the house, and every morning laid a wreath of flowers by her mother's bed before she woke, and in which a rose from each tree. In the winter, Snow White lit the fire and hung the kettle on the wrekin. The kettle was of copper, and shone like gold, so brightly was it polished. In the evening, when the snowflakes fell, her mother said, "Go, Snow White, and bolt the door." And then they sat round the hearth, and the mother took her spectacles and read aloud out of a large book, and the 2 girls listened as they sat and span. And close by them lay a lamb upon the floor, and behind them upon a perch sat a white dove with its head hidden beneath its wings. One evening, as they were thus sitting comfortably together, someone knocked at the door, as if he wished to be let in. The mother said, "Quick, Rose Red, open the door. It must be a traveller who is seeking shelter." Rose Red went and pushed back the bolt, thinking that it was a poor man. But it was not. It was a bear that stretched his broad black head within the house. Rose Red screamed and sprang back. The lamb bleated, the dove fluttered, and Snow White hid herself behind her mother's bed. But the bear began to speak, and said, "Do not be afraid. I will do you no harm. I am half frozen, and only want to warm myself a little beside you." "Poor bear," said the mother, "lie down by the fire, only take care that you do not burn your coat." And then she cried, "Snow White, Rose Red, come out, the bear will do you no harm, he means well." So they both came out, and by the lamb and the dove came nearer, and were not afraid of him. The bear said, "Here, children, knock the snow out of my coat a little." So they brought the broom and swept the bear's hide clean, and he stretched himself by the fire and growled contentedly and comfortably. It was not long before they grew quiet at home, and played tricks with their clumsy guest. They tugged his hair with their hands, put their feet up on his back, and rolled him about, or they took a hazel switch and beat him, and when he growled they laughed. But the bear took it all in good parts. Only when they were too rough he called out, "Leave me alive, children. Snowy White and Rosy Red, will you beat your lover dead?" When it was bedtime and the others went to bed, the mother said to the bear, "You can lie there by the hearth, and then you will be safe from the cold and the bad weather." As soon as day dawned, the 2 children let him out, and he trotted across the snow into the forest. Henceforth the bear came every evening at the same time, laid himself down by the hearth, and let the children amuse themselves with him as much as they liked, and they got so used to him that the doors were never fastened until their black friend had arrived. When spring had come, and all outside was green, the bear said one morning to Snow White, "Now I must go away, and cannot come back for the whole summer." "Where are you going then, dear bear?" asked Snow White. "I must go into the forest and guard my treasures from the wicked dwarfs. In the winter, when the earth is frozen hard, they are obliged to stay below, and cannot work their way through. But now, when the sun has thawed and warmed the earth, they break through it, and come out to pry and steal, and what once gets into their hands and in their caves does not easily see daylight again." Snow White was quite sorry for his going away. and as she unbolted the door for him and the bear was hurrying out, he caught against the bolt, and a piece of his hairy coat was torn off, and it seemed to Snow White as if she had seen gold shining through it. But she was not sure about it. The bear ran away quickly, and was soon out of sight behind the trees. A short time afterwards, the mother sent her children into the forest to get firewood. There they found a big tree which lay felled on the ground, and close by the trunk something was jumping backwards and forwards in the grass, but they could not make out what it was. Then they came nearer. They saw a dwarf with an old withered face, and a snow-white beard a yard long. The end of the beard was caught in the crevice of the tree, and the little fellow was jumping backwards and forwards like a dog tied to a rope, and he did not know what to do. He glared at the girls with his fiery red eyes, and cried, "Why do you stand there? Can you not come here and help me?" "What are you about here, little man?" asked Rose Red. "You stupid prying goose," answered the dwarf. "I was going to split the tree to get a little wood for cooking, and the little bit of food that one of us wants to get the little bit of food that one of us wants gets burnt up directly with thick logs. We do not swallow so much as you coarse, greedy folk. I had just driven the wedge safely in, and everything was going as I wished, but the wretched wood was too smooth, and suddenly sprang asunder, and the tree closed so quickly that I could not pull out my beautiful white beard. So now it is tight in, and I cannot get away, and the silly, sleek, milk-faced things laugh. Ugh, how odious you are!" The children tried very hard, but they couldn't pull the beard out. It was caught too fast. "I will run and fetch someone," said Rose Red. "You senseless goose," snarled the dwarf. "Why should you fetch someone? You're already too many for me. Can you not think of something better?" "Don't be impatient," said Snow White. "I will help you." And she pulled her scissors out of her pocket and cut off the end of the beard. As soon as the dwarf felt himself free, he laid hold of a bag which lay amongst the roots of the tree and which was full of gold, and lifted it up, grumbling to himself. "Uncouth people, to cut off a piece of my fine beard. Bad luck to you." And then he swung the bag upon his back, and went off without even once looking at the children. Some time after that, Snow White and Rose Red went to catch a dish of fish. As they came near the brook, they saw something like a large grasshopper jumping towards the water, as if it was going to leap in. They ran to it, and found it was a dwarf. "Where are you going?" said Rose Red. "You surely don't want to go into the water?" "I am not such a fool," cried the dwarf. "Don't you see that the accursed fish wants to pull me in?" The little man had been sitting there fishing, and unluckily the wind had twisted his beard with the fishing line. Just then a big fish bit, and the feeble creature had not the strength to pull it out, and the fish kept the upper hand and pulled the dwarf towards him. He held on to all the reeds and rushes, but it was of little good, and he was forced to follow the movements of the fish, and was in urgent danger of being dragged into the water. The girls came just in time. They held him fast and tried to free his beard from the line, but all in vain. Beard and line were entangled fast together. Nothing was left but to bring out the scissors and cut the beard, whereby a small part of it was lost. When the dwarf saw that, he screamed out, "Is that civil, you toadstool, to disfigure one's face? Was it not enough to clip off the end of my beard? Now you have cut off the best part of it. I cannot let myself be seen by my people. I wish you had been made to I wish you had been made to run the soles off your shoes." Then he took out a sack of pearls which lay in the rushing water. He dragged it away and disappeared behind a stone. It happened that soon afterwards the mother sent the two children to the town to buy needles and thread and laces and ribbons. The road led them across the heath, upon which huge pieces of rock lay strewn here and there. Now they noticed a large bird hovering in the air, flying slowly round and round above them. It sank lower and lower, and at last settled on a rock not far off. Directly afterwards they heard a loud, piteous cry. They ran up, and saw with horror that the eagle had seized their old acquaintance the dwarf, and was going to carry him off. The children, full of pity, at once took tight hold of the little man, and pulled against the eagle so long that at last he let his booty go. As soon as the dwarf had recovered from this first fright, he cried with his shrill voice, "Could you not have done it more carefully? You dragged at my brown coat, so that it is all torn and full of holes. You helpless, clumsy creatures." Then he took up a sack of precious stones, and slipped away again under the rock into his hole. The girls, who by this time were used to his thanklessness, went on their way and did their business in town. As they crossed the heath again on the way home, they surprised the dwarf, who had emptied out his bag of precious stones in a clean spot, and had not thought that anyone would come here so late. The evening sun shone upon the brilliant stones, and they glittered and sparkled with all colours, so beautifully that the children stood still and looked at them. "Why do you stand gaping there?" cried the dwarf, and his ashen grey face became copper red with rage. He was going on with his bad words when a loud growling was heard, and a black bear came trotting towards them out of the forest. The dwarf sprang up in fright, but he could not get to his cave, for the bear was already close. And then, in the dread of his heart, he cried, "Dear Mr. Bear, spare me. I will give you all my treasures. Look, the beautiful jewels lying there. Grant me my life. What do you want with such a slender little fellow as I? You would not feel me between your teeth. Come, take these two wicked girls. They are tender morsels for you, fat young quails. For mercy's sake, eat them." The bear took no heed of his words, but gave the wicked creature a single blow with his paw, and he did not move again. The girls had run away, but the bear called to them, "Snow White and Rose Red, do not be afraid. Wait, I will come with you." Then they knew his voice and waited, and when he came up to them, suddenly his bearskin fell off, and he stood there a handsome man, clothed all in gold. "I am a king's son," he said, "and I was bewitched by that wicked dwarf who had stolen my treasures. I have had to run about the forest as a savage bear until I was freed by his death. Now he has got his well-deserved punishment." And Snow White was married to him, and Rose Red to his brother, and they divided between them the great treasure which the dwarf had gathered together in his cave. The old mother lived peacefully and happily with her children for many years. She took the two rose trees with her, and they stood before her window, and every year bore the most beautiful roses, white and red. Alright. I've somehow managed to intersperse reasonably cheerful ones with the horrible ones, and I am sorry to say that this next one is not fun. Sorry about that. Okay, this one's called the juniper tree. It is now long ago, quite 2,000 years, since there was a rich man who had a beautiful and pious wife, and they loved each other dearly. They had, however, no children, though they wished for them very much, and the woman prayed for them day and night, but still they had none. Now there was a courtyard in front of their house, in which was a juniper tree, and one day in winter the woman was standing beneath it, paring herself an apple, and while she was paring herself the apple she cut her finger, and blood fell upon the snow. "Ah," said the woman, and sighed right heavily, and looked at the blood before her, and was most unhappy. "Ah, if I had but a child as red as blood and as white as snow." And while she thus spake, she became quite happy in her mind, and felt just as if that were going to happen. Then she went into the house, and a month went by, and the snow was gone, and 2 months, and then everything was green, and 3 months, and then all the flowers came out of the earth. 4 months, and then all the trees in the wood grew thicker, and the green branches were all closely entwined, and the birds sang until the wood resounded and blossoms fell from the trees. Then the 5th month passed away, and she stood under the juniper tree, which smelt so sweetly that her heart leapt, and she fell on her knees and was beside herself with joy. And when the 6th month was over, the fruit was large and fine, and then she was quite still. And the 7th month she snatched at the juniper berries and ate them greedily. Then she grew sick and sorrowful. When the 8th month passed, and she called to her husband and wept, and said, "If I die, then bury me beneath the juniper tree." Then she was quite comforted and happy until the next month was over, and then she had a child as white as snow and as red as blood. When she beheld it, she was so delighted that she died. Then her husband buried her beneath the juniper tree, and he began to weep sore. After some time he was more at ease, and though he still wept, he could bear it, and after some time longer he took another wife. By the second wife he had a daughter, but the first wife's child was a little son, and he was as red as blood and as white as snow. When the woman looked at her daughter she loved her very much, but then she looked at the little boy, and it seemed to cut her to her heart, for the thought came into her mind that he would always stand in her way, and she was forever thinking how she could get all the fortune for her daughter. And the evil one filled her mind with this, till she was quite wroth with the little boy, and slapped him here and cuffed him there, until the unhappy child was in continual terror, for when he came out of school he had no peace in any place. One day the woman had gone upstairs to her room, and her little daughter went up too, and she said, "Mother, give me an apple." "Yes, my child," said the woman, and gave her a fine apple out of the chest. But the chest had a great heavy lid, with a great sharp iron lock. "Mother," said the little daughter, "is brother not to have one too?" This made the woman angry, but she said yes, when he comes out of school. And when she saw from the window that he was coming, it was just as if the devil entered into her, and she snatched at the apples, and took it away again from her daughter, and said, Thou shalt not have one before thy brother. Then she threw the apple into the chest and shut it. And then the little boy came in at the door, and the devil made her say to him kindly, My son, wilt thou have an apple? And she looked wickedly at him. Mother, said the little boy, how dreadful you look. Yes, give me an apple. Sorry, just the idea that, like, a kid would be like, you look terrible. Yes, give me an apple. Then it seemed to her as if she were forced to say to him, Come with me. And she opened the lid of the chest, and said, Take out an apple for thyself. And while the boy was stooping inside, the devil prompted her, and crash! She shut the lid down, and his head flew off and fell among the apples. Then she was overwhelmed with terror, and thought, If I could but make them think that it was not done by me. So she went upstairs to her room, to her chest of drawers, and took a white handkerchief out of the top drawer, and set the head on the neck again, and folded the handkerchief so that nothing could be seen. And she set him on the chair in front of the door, and put the apple in his hand. After this, Marlinchen came into the kitchen to her mother, who was standing by the fire with a pan of hot water before her, which she was constantly stirring round. Mother, said Marlinchen, brother is sitting at the door, and he looks quite white and has an apple in his hand. I asked him to give me the apple, but he didn't answer me, and I was quite frightened. Go back to him, said the mother. If he will not answer thee, give him a box on the ear. So Marlinchen went to him, and said, Brother, give me the apple. But he was silent, and she gave him a box on the ear, on which his head fell down. Marlinchen was terrified, and began crying and screaming, and ran to her mother, and said, Alas, mother, I have knocked my brother's head off. And she wept, and could not be comforted. Marlinchen, said the mother, What hast thou done? But be quiet, and let no one know it. It cannot be helped now. We will make him into black puddings. Then the mother took the little boy, and chopped him in pieces, and put him into the pan, and made him into black pudding. But Marlinchen stood by weeping and weeping, and all her tears fell into the pan, and there was no need of any salt. When the father came home and sat down to dinner, and said, But where is my son? And the mother served up a great dish of black puddings, and Marlinchen wept, and could not leave off. And then the father said again, But where is my son? Ah, said the mother, he has gone across the country to his mother's great uncle, and he will stay there a while. And what is he going to do there? He did not even say goodbye to me. Oh, he wanted to go, and he asked me if he might stay 6 weeks. He is well taken care of there. Ah, said the man, I feel so unhappy lest all should not be right. He ought to have said goodbye to me. And with that he began to eat, and said, Marlinchen, why art thou crying? Thy brother will certainly come back. Then he said, Ah, wife, how delicious this food is. Give me some more. And the more he ate, the more he wanted to have. And he said, Give me some more. You shall have none of it. It seems to me as if it were all mine. And he ate, and threw all the bones under the table, until he had finished the whole. But Marlinchen went away to her chest of drawers, and took her best silk handkerchief out of the bottom drawer, and got all the bones from beneath the table, and tied them up in her silk handkerchief, and carried them outside the door, weeping tears of blood. Then the juniper tree began to stir itself, and the branches parted asunder, and moved together again, just as if someone was rejoicing and clapping his hands. At the same time a mist seemed to arise from the tree, and in the centre of this mist it burned like a fire, and a beautiful bird flew out of the fire, singing magnificently. And he flew up high in the air, and when he was gone, the juniper tree was just as it had been before, and the handkerchief with the bones was no longer there. Marlinchen, however, was as gay and happy as if her brother were still alive, and she went merrily into the house and sat down to dinner and ate. But the bird flew away, and lighted on a goldsmith's house, and began to sing. My mother she killed me, my father he ate me, my sister little Marlinchen gathered together all my bones, tied them in a silken handkerchief, laid them beneath the juniper tree. Quit, quit, what a beautiful bird am I. The goldsmith was sitting in his workshop making a gold chain, when he heard the bird, which was singing upon his roof, and very beautiful the song seemed to him. He stood up, but as he crossed the threshold he lost one of his slippers, but he went away right up in the middle of the street, with one shoe on and one sock, and he had his apron on, and in one hand he had the gold chain, and in other the pinches, and the sun shining brightly on the street. When he went right on and stood still, he said to the bird, Bird, he said then, how beautifully thou canst sing! Sing me that piece again." "No," said the bird, "I will not sing it twice for nothing. Give me the golden chain, and then I will sing it for thee." "There," said the goldsmith, "there is the golden chain for thee. Now sing me that song again." Then the bird came and took the golden chain in his right claw, and went and sat in front of the goldsmith, and sang, "My mother she killed me, my father he ate me, my sister little Marlinchen gathered together all my bones, tied them in a silken handkerchief, laid them beneath the juniper tree. Quit, quit, what a beautiful bird am I." And then the bird flew away to a shoemaker, and lighted on his roof, and sang, "My mother she killed me, my father he ate me, my sister little Marlinchen gathered all my bones, tied them in a silken handkerchief, laid them beneath the juniper tree. Quit, quit, what a beautiful bird am I." The shoemaker heard that, and ran out of doors in his shirt sleeves, and looked up at his roof, and was forced to hold his hand before his eyes, lest the sun should blind him. "Bird," said he, "how beautifully thou canst sing." When he called in his door, "Wife, just come outside, there is a bird. Look at that bird, he can just sing so well." Then he called his daughter and children, and apprentices, boys and girls, and they all came up the street and looked at the bird, and saw how beautiful he was, and what fine red and green feathers he had, and how like real gold his neck was, and how his eyes and his head shone like stars. "Bird," said the shoemaker, "sing me that song again." "Nay," said the bird, "I do not sing twice for nothing, thou must give me something." "Wife," said the man, "go to the garret, upon the top shelf there stands a pair of red shoes, bring them down." Then the wife went and brought the shoes. "There, bird," said the man, "now sing me that piece again." Then the bird came and took Then the bird came and took the shoes in his left claw, and flew back on the roof, and sang, "My mother she killed me, my father he ate me, my sister little Marlinchen gathered together all my bones, tied them in a silken handkerchief, laid them beneath the juniper tree. Quit, quit, what a beautiful bird am I." And when he had sung the whole song he flew away. In his right claw he had the chain, and the shoes in his left, and he flew far away to the mill, and the mill went clip clap, clip clap, clip clap, and in the mill sat 20 millers' men, hewing a stone, and cutting, hick hack, hick hack, hick hack, and the mill went clip clap, clip clap, clip clap, and then the bird went and sat on a lime tree, which stood in front of the mill, and sang, "My mother she killed me," and then one of them stopped working. "My father he ate me," then two more stopped working and listened to that. "My sister little Marlinchen," then four more stopped. "Gathered together all of my bones, tied them in a silken handkerchief." Now 8 only were hewing. "Laid them beneath," now only 5, "the juniper tree," and now only 1. "Quit, quit, what a beautiful bird am I." And then the last one stopped also, and heard the last words. "Bird," said he, "how beautifully thou singest. Let me too hear that, sing once more for me." "Nay," said the bird, "I will not sing twice for nothing. Give me the millstone, and then I will sing it again." "Yes," said he, "if it belonged to me only thou shouldst have it." "Yes," said the others, "if he sings again he shall have it." Then the bird came down, and the 20 millers all set to work with a beam, and raised the stone up, and the bird stuck his neck through the hole, and put the stone on as if it were a collar, and flew onto the tree again, and sang, "My mother she killed me, my father he ate me, my sister little Marlinchen gathered together all my bones, tied them in a silken handkerchief, laid them beneath the juniper tree. Quit, quit, what a beautiful bird am I." And when he was done singing, he spread his wings, and in his right claw he had the chain, and in his left the shoes, and round his neck a millstone, and he flew far away to his father's house. In the room sat the father, the mother, and Marlinchen at dinner. And the father said, "How light-hearted I feel, how happy I am." "Nay," said the mother, "I feel so uneasy, just as if a heavy storm were coming." Marlinchen, however, sat weeping and weeping, and then came the bird flying, and as it seated itself on the roof of the floor, on the roof, as it seated itself on the roof, the father said, "Ah, I feel so truly happy, and the sun is shining beautifully outside. I feel just as if I were about to see some old friend again." "Nay," said the woman, "I feel so anxious, my teeth chatter, and I seem to have fire in my veins." And she tore her stays open. But Marlinchen sat in the corner crying, and held her plate before her eyes, and cried till it was quite wet. And then the bird sat in the juniper tree and sang, "My mother she killed me." And then the mother stopped her ears, and shut her eyes, and would not see or hear, but there was a roaring in her ears like the most violent storm, and her eyes burnt and flashed like lightning. "My father he ate me." "Ah, mother," says the man, "That is a beautiful bird. He sings so splendidly, and the sun shines so warm, and there is a smell just like cinnamon. My sister, little Marlinchen." Then Marlinchen laid her head on her knees and wept without ceasing. But the man said, "I'm going out. I must see the bird quite close." "Oh, don't go," said the woman. "I feel as if the whole house were shaking and on fire." But the man went out and looked at the bird. "Gathered together all of my birds in a silk handkerchief, laid them beneath the juniper tree. Quit, quit, what a beautiful bird am I." On this the bird let the golden chain fall, and it fell exactly around the man's neck, so exactly round it that it fitted beautifully. Then he went in and said, "Just look what a fine bird he is, and what a handsome gold chain he has given me, and how pretty he is." But the woman was terrified and fell down on the floor in the room, and her cap fell off her head. Then sang the bird once more, "My mother she killed me. Would that I were 1,000 feet beneath the earth so as not to hear that. My father he ate me." And then the woman fell down again as if dead. "My sister, little Marlinchen." "Ah," said Marlinchen, "I too will go out and see if the bird will give me anything." And she went out. "Gathered together all of my bones, tied them in a silken handkerchief." Then he threw down the shoes to her. "Laid them beneath the juniper tree. Quit, quit, what a beautiful bird am I." Then she was light-hearted and joyous, and she put on the new red shoes and danced and leapt around the house. "Ah," she said, "I was so sad when I went out, and now I'm so light-hearted. That is a splendid bird. He has given me a pair of red shoes." "Well," said the woman, and sprang to her feet, and her hair stood up like flames in fire. "I feel as if the world were coming to an end. I too will go out and see if my heart feels lighter." And as she went out the door, crash! The bird threw down the millstone on her head, and she was entirely crushed by it. The father and Marlinchen heard what happened, and went out, and smoke, flames, and fire were rising from the place. And when that was over, there stood the little brother, and he took his father and Marlinchen by the hand, and all three were right glad, and they went into the house to dinner and ate. Yeah, this one's mad. So, like, a lot of these have, like, explicit morals to them, but some of them just are so ridiculously complex that it's difficult to tell what the point is supposed to be. I guess, like, don't kill your stepson. Um, which, fair, I guess, but yeah. There's a lot of killing of children for no reason, or, like, selling your firstborn child for something. Um, don't behead your son, yeah. That is the moral of this story. Don't behead your son. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why they needed a story to, like, specifically tell you not to behead your son, but you got a good point though. What is your firstborn good for if not selling to a random stranger? Alright. Why do so many creatures want the fun? This is true, they are small and noisy, and I don't know why anyone would want someone's firstborn child. I guess because, like, there's some level of like power in being a firstborn child as opposed to any other one, right? Like, you wouldn't want their, like, youngest child, because what's the point then? Step 3, profit. Alright, so the next one we've got is called The 12 Brothers, and then after that I will read The 12 Dancing Princesses, and that's quite thematic, I guess. Alright. As a youngest child, I feel slightly offended. Yeah, I was about to say, you should feel relieved. You're not going to be, like, carted off by some stranger in the night because your parents were really craving a salad. Alright. There was once upon a time a king and queen who lived happily together and had 12 children, but they were all boys. Then the king said to his wife, if the 13th child which thou art about to bring into the world is a girl, the 12 boys shall die, in order that her possessions may be great, and that the kingdom may fall to her alone. He caused likewise 12 coffins to be made. This is already a lot. He caused likewise 12 coffins to be made, which were already filled with shavings, and in each lay a little pillow for the dead. And he had them taken to a locked-up room, and then he gave the queen the key of it, and bade her not speak of this to anyone. The mother, however, now sat and lamented all day long, until the youngest son, who was always with her, and whom she had named Benjamin from the Bible, said to her, "Dear mother, why art thou so sad?" "Dearest child," she answered, "I may not tell thee." But he let her have no rest until she went and unlocked the room, and showed him the 12 coffins, ready filled with shavings. And then she said, "My dearest Benjamin, thy father had had these coffins made for thee and for thy 11 brothers, for if I bring a little girl into the world, you are all to be killed and buried in them." And as she wept while she was saying this, the son comforted her, and said, "Weep not, dear mother, we will save ourselves and go hence." But she said, "Go forth into the forest with thy 11 brothers, and let one sit constantly on the highest tree which can be found, and keep watch, looking towards the tower here in the castle. If I give birth to a little son, I will put up a white flag, and then you may venture to come back. But if I bear a daughter, I will hoist a red flag, and then fly hence as quickly as you are able, and may the good God protect you. And every night I will rise up and pray for you, in winter that you may be able to warm yourself by the fire, and in summer that you may not faint away with the heat." After she had blessed her sons, therefore, they went forth into the forest. They each kept watch in turn, and sat in the highest oak, and looked towards the tower. When 11 days had passed, and the turn came to Benjamin, he saw that a flag was being raised. It was, however, not the white, but the blood-red flag, which announced that they were all to die. When the brothers heard that, they were very angry, and said, "Are we all to suffer death for the sake of a girl? We swear that we will avenge ourselves. Wheresoever we find our girl, her red blood shall flow." Thereupon they went deeper into the forest, and in the midst of it, where it was darkest, they found a little bewitched hut, which was standing empty. And then said they, "Here we will dwell, and thou, Benjamin, who art the youngest and weakest, thou shalt stay at home and keep house, and we others will go out and get food." Then they went into the forest and shot hares, wild deer, birds, and pigeons, and whatsoever there was to eat. This they took to Benjamin, who had to dress it for them in order that they might appease their hunger. They lived together for 10 years in the little hut, and the time did not appear long to them. The little daughter, which their mother the queen had given birth to, was now grown up. She was good of heart and fair of face, and had a golden star on her forehead. Once, when it was the great washing, she saw 12 men's shirts among the things, and asked her mother, "To whom do these 12 shirts belong? For they are far too small for father." And then the queen answered with a heavy heart, "Dear child, those belong to thy 12 brothers." Said the maiden, "Where are my 12 brothers? I have never yet heard of them." And she replied, "God knows where they are. They are wandering about the world." And then she took the maiden and opened the chamber for her, and showed her the 12 coffins with the shavings and pillows for the head. "These coffins," said she, "were destined for thy brothers, but they went away secretly before thou wert born." And she related to her how everything had happened. And then said the maiden, "Dear mother, weep not. I will go and seek my brothers." So she took the 12 shirts and went forth, and straight into the great forest. She walked the whole day, and in the evening she came to the bewitched hut. And then she entered it, and found a young boy, who asked, "From whence comest thou, and whither art thou bound?" And was astonished that she was so beautiful, and wore royal garments, and had a star in her forehead. And she answered, "I am the king's daughter, and am seeking my 12 brothers, and I will walk as far as the sky is blue until I find them." She likewise showed him the 12 shirts which belonged to them. And then Benjamin saw that, "I am thy youngest brother." And she began to weep for joy, and Benjamin wept also, and they embraced each other with the greatest love. But after this he said, "Dear sister, there is still one difficulty. We have agreed that every maiden whom we meet shall die, because we have been obliged to leave our kingdom on account of a girl." Then said she, "I will willingly die, if by doing so I can deliver my 12 brothers." "No," answered he, "thou shalt not die. Seat thyself beneath this tub until our 11 brothers come home, and then I will soon come to an agreement with them." She did so, and when it was night, the others came from hunting, and their dinner was ready. And as they were sitting at the table and eating, they asked, "What news is there?" Said Benjamin, "Don't you know anything?" "No," they answered. "You have been in the forest, and I have stayed at home, and yet I know more than you do." "Tell us then," they cried. He answered, "But promise me that the first maiden who meets us shall not be killed." "Yes," they all cried, "she shall have mercy, only do tell us." And then said he, "Our sister is here." And he lifted up the tub, and the king's daughter came forth in her royal garments, with the golden star on her forehead, and she was beautiful, delicate, and fair. And then they all rejoiced and fell on her neck and loved her with all their hearts. Now she stayed at home with Benjamin and helped him with the work. The 11 went into the forest and caught game and deer and birds and wood pigeons that they might have food, and the little sister and Benjamin took care to make it ready for them. She sought for the wood for cooking and herbs for vegetables, and put the pans on the fire so that the dinner was always ready when the 11 came. She likewise kept order in the little house, and put beautifully white clean coverings on the little beds, and the brothers were always contented and lived in great harmony with her. Once on a time, and the two at home had prepared a beautiful entertainment, and when they were all together they sat down and ate and drank and were full of gladness. There was, however, a little garden belonging to the bewitched house, wherein stood 12 lily flowers, which are likewise called students. She wished to give her brothers pleasure, and plucked the 12 flowers, and thought she would present each brother with one while at dinner. But the self-same moment that she plucked the flowers, the 12 brothers were changed into 12 ravens, and flew away over the forest, and the house and garden vanished likewise. And how the poor maiden was alone in the wild forest. And when she looked around, an old woman was standing near her, who said, "My child, what hast thou done? Why didst thou not leave the 12 white flowers growing? They were thy brothers, who are now for evermore changed into ravens." The maiden said, weeping, "Is there no way of delivering them?" "No," said the woman, "but there is but one in the whole world, and that is so hard that thou wilt not deliver them by it, for thou must be dumb for 7 years, and mayst not speak or laugh, and if thou speakest one single word, and only an hour of the 7 years is wanting, all is in vain, and thy brothers will be killed by the one word." And then said the maiden in her heart, "I know with certainty that I shall set my brothers free," and went and sought a high tree, and seated herself in it, and span, and neither spoke nor laughed. Now it so happened that a king was hunting in the forest, who had a great greyhound, which ran to the tree on which the maiden was sitting, and sprang about it, whining and barking at her. And then the king came by, and saw the beautiful king's daughter, with the golden star on her brow, and was so charmed with her beauty that he called to ask her if she would be his wife. She made no answer, but nodded a little with her head. And so he climbed up the tree himself, carried her down, placed her on his horse, and bore her home. Then the wedding was solemnized with great magnificence and rejoicing, but the bride neither spoke nor smiled. When they had lived happily together for a few years, the king's mother, who was a wicked woman, began to slander the young queen, and said to the king, "This is a common beggar girl whom thou hast brought back with thee. Who knows what impious tricks she practises secretly? Even if she be dumb and not able to speak, she still might laugh for once. But those who do not laugh have bad consciences. At first the king would not believe it, but the old woman urged this so long, and accused her of so many evil things, that at last the king let himself be persuaded, and sentenced her to death. And now a great fire was lighted in the courtyard, in which she was to be burnt, and the king stood above at the window, and looked on with tearful eyes, because he still loved her so much. And when she was bound fast to the stake, and the fire was licking at her clothes with its red tongue, the last instant of the 7 years expired, and then a whirring sound was heard in the air, and 12 ravens came flying towards the place, and sank downwards, and when they touched the earth they were her 12 brothers, whom she had delivered. They tore the fire asunder, extinguished the flames, and set their dear sister free, and embraced her. And now, as she dared to open her mouth and speak, she told the king why she had been dumb, and had never laughed. And the king rejoiced when he heard that she was innocent, and they all lived in great unity until their death. And the wicked stepmother was taken before the judge, and put into a barrel filled with boiling oil and venomous snakes, and died an evil death. Which is intense. A lot of these stories are like reasonably chill most of the way through, and then you get to the end and it's just like, yeah, they put her in a barrel of boiling oil and venomous snakes to kill her, because that's a reasonable way of executing people. Not sure why. Yeah, that's all of the stories that I had particularly picked out. I will find the 12 Dancing Princesses in here, because I'm pretty sure it's in here. But if anyone has any other requests for Grimm's fairy tales that they'd like, just drop them in the chat, I guess. How do I execute my enemies? That would be telling, you know? I really couldn't say. they really have a thing for like um, numbered stories, like the 6 swans, the 7 ravens, the 12 brothers. Sorry, the bot's a little bit overactive in the chat. Yeah, to be fair though, you do keep trying to curse. Um, I actually don't think the 12 Dancing Princesses is in this one, which is a real shame because I actually love that story so much. I used to read it all the time when I was a kid. I'm really sorry, Lizzie. It's true, cursing is a good way to hex your enemies. Um, What should we read now? Alright, do we want... Do we want one of the other 12 somethings? There's a lot of them. There's the 12 idle servants, the 12 huntsmen, the 12 apostles. Or we could go with another classic one like Sleeping Beauty. What do you reckon? Which one? Right. Oh, what's the most Halloweeny? I mean, there's one literally called Godfather Death, and that sounds pretty spooky to me. Hans the Hedgehog. Oh yeah, which one is that? I don't think there's one literally called Hans the Hedgehog in here, but there is definitely one that is about Hans. Oh man. Okay, hang on. There's like a remarkable number of these, to be honest. They've got such like odd names as well. Like there's one just called the Pack of Ragamuffins. Or the Gnome. Alright, I'm not seeing Hans the Hedgehog as like a listed name of one of them. There are a couple with hands in them, but I don't think any of them are actually about that particular story. Oh, Mother Hole is in there, yeah, I can read Mother Hole. That is page 212. Oh, that's not Mother Hole. Hang on 1 second. Ah, okay, I was at 112. I'm bad at things. Okay. we're gonna do Mother Hole, and then we'll do Ragamuffins, and then we'll do the girl without hands. Okay. There was once a widow who had 2 daughters, one of whom was pretty and industrious, whilst the other was ugly and idle. But she was much fonder of the ugly and idle one, because she was her own daughter, and the other, who was a stepdaughter, was obliged to do all the work and be the Cinderella of the house. I'm sensing a theme here. Every day the poor girl had to sit by a well in the highway and spin until her fingers bled. Now it happened that one day the shuttle was marked with her blood, and so she dipped it in the well to wash the mark off. But it dropped out of her hand and fell to the bottom, and she began to weep and ran to her stepmother and told her of the mishap. But she scolded her sharply, and was so merciless as to say, "Since you have let the shuttle fall in, you must fetch it out again." So the girl went back to the well, and did not know what to do. And in the sorrow of her heart she jumped into the well to get the shuttle. She lost her senses, and when she awoke and came to herself again, she was in a lovely meadow where the sun was shining and many thousands of flowers were growing. At last came a oven full of bread, and the bread cried out, "Oh, take me out, or I shall burn. I have been baked a long time." So she went up to it and took out all the loaves one after another with the bread shovel, and after that she went on till she came to a tree covered with apples, which called out to her, "Oh, shake me, shake me, we apples are all ripe." So she shook the tree till the apples fell like rain, and went on shaking till they were all down, and when she had gathered them into a heap she went on her way. At last she came to a little house, out of which an old woman peeped, but she had such large teeth that the girl was frightened and was about to run away. But "What are you afraid of, child? Stay with me, and if you will do all the work in the house properly, you shall be the better for it. Only you must take care to make my bed well, and shake it thoroughly till the feathers fly, for then there is snow on the earth, and I am Mother Hole." As the old woman spoke so kindly to her, the girl took courage, and agreed to enter her service. She attended to everything to the satisfaction of her mistress, and always shook the bed so vigorously that the feathers flew about like snowflakes. So she had a pleasant life with her, never an angry word, and boiled or roast meat every day. She stayed some time with Mother Holle, but when she became that, she did not know what was the matter with her, but found at length that it was homesickness. Though she was a many times better off here than at home, still she had a longing to be there. At last she said to the old woman, "I have a longing for home, and however well off I am down here, cannot stay any longer. I must go up again to my own people." And Mother Holle said, "I am pleased that you long for your home again, and as you have served me so truly, I myself will take you up again." Thereupon she took her by the hand and led her to a large door. The door was opened, and just as the maiden was standing beneath the doorway, a heavy shower of golden rain fell, and all the gold remained sticking to her, so that she was completely covered over with it. "So industrious," said Mother Holle, and at the same time she gave her back the shuttle, which she had let fall into the well. Thereupon the door closed, and the maiden found herself up above the earth, not far from her mother's house. And as she went into the yard, the cock was standing by the well side, and cried, but the pitch stuck fast to her, and could not go. And wait, what? Huh? Oh, sorry, that's the caption on the illustration. Sorry, there's like an illustration going across the page, and I got very confused. Okay, as she went back into the side and cried, "Cock-a-doodle-doo, your golden girls come back to you." And so she went in to her mother, and as she arrived thus covered with gold, she was well received, both by her and her sister. The girl told all that had happened to her, and as soon as the mother heard how she had come by so much wealth, she was very anxious to obtain the same good luck for the ugly and lazy daughter. She had to seat herself by the well and spin, and in order that the shuttle might be stained with blood, she stuck her hand into a thorn bush and pricked her finger, and then she threw her shuttle into the well and jumped in after it. She came, like the other, to the beautiful meadow, and walked along the very same path. When she got to the oven, the bread again came out, "I shall burn. I have baked for a long time." But the lazy thing answered, "As if I had any wish to make myself dirty," and on she went. And soon she came to the apple tree, which cried, "Oh, shake me, we apples are all ripe." But she answered, "I like that, one of you might fall on my head," and so went on. When she came to Mother Holle's house, she was not afraid, for she had already heard of her big teeth, and she hired herself to her immediately. The first day she forced herself to work diligently, and obeyed Mother Holle whenever she told her to do anything, for she was thinking of all the gold that she would give to her. And on the third day still more so, and then she would not get up in the morning at all. Neither did she make Mother Holle's bed as she ought, and she did not shake it so as to make the feathers fly up. and Mother Holle was soon tired of this and gave her notice to leave. The lazy girl was willing enough to go, and thought that now the golden rain would come. Mother Holle led her also to the great door, but while she was standing beneath it, instead of the gold, a big kettle full of pitch was emptied above her. "That is the reward for your service," said Mother Holle, and shut the door. So the lazy girl went home, but she was quite covered with pitch, and the cock by the well side, as soon as he saw her, cried, "Do, pitchy girls, come back to you." But the pitch stuck fast to her, and could not be got off as long as she lived. That's also, that last line is the caption that was on this illustration, which is really great. Cool. What was the other one that we said we would do? The ragamuffins, and then the girl without hands. Okay, cool. The artwork is really lovely. Actually, I should show you guys. These are the end pages on it. They're so pretty. There's like a bunch of like illustrations and colored illustrations throughout the book as well. I'll try. Okay, the pack of ragamuffins is the next one. Me too. I also wish I knew how to art, to be honest. Okay. The cock once said to the hen, "It is now the time when our nuts are ripe, so let us go to the hill together, and for once eat our fill before the squirrel takes them all away." "Yes," replied the hen, "come, and we shall have some fun together." And then they went away to the hill, and on it was a bright day. They stayed till evening. Now I do not know whether it was too fast or whether they had become proud, but they would not go home on foot, and the cock had to build a little carriage of nutshells. And when it was ready, the little hen seated herself in it, and said to the cock, "Thou canst just harness thyself to it." "I like that," said the cock. "I would rather go home on foot than let myself be harnessed to it. No, that is not our bargain. I do not mind being coachman and sitting on the box, but drag it myself I will not." As they were thus disputing, a duck quacked to them, "You thieving folks, who bade you to go to my nut hill? Wait, you shall suffer for it," and ran with open beak at the cock. But the cock was also not idle, and fell but wounded with his spurs, that she also begged for mercy, and willingly let herself be harnessed to the carriage as a punishment. The little cock now seated himself in the box, and was coachman, and thereupon they went off in a gallop, with "Duck, go as fast as thou canst." When they had driven a part of the way, they met 2 foot passengers, a pin and a needle, and they cried, "Stop, stop," and said that it would soon be dark as pitch, and then they could not go a step further, and that it was so dirty on the road, and asked if they could not get into the carriage for a while. They had been at the tailor's public house by the gate, and had stayed too long over beer. The cock let them both get in, but they had to promise him that his little hen not to step on their feet. Late in the evening they came to an inn, and as they did not like to go further by night, and as the duck was also not strong on her feet, and fell from one side to the other, they went in. The host at first made many objections. His house was already full. Besides, he thought, they could not be very distinguished persons. But at last, as they made pleasant speeches and told him that he should have the egg which their little hen has laid on the way, and should likewise keep the duck, which laid one every day, he at length said that they might stay the night. And now they had themselves well set right. Also, just in case you wanted to see that. Early in the morning, when day was breaking and everyone was asleep, the cock awoke the hen, brought the egg, pecked it open, and they ate it together. But they threw the shell on the hearth. Then they went to the needle, which was still asleep, took it by the head, and stuck it into the cushion of the landlord, and put the pin in his towel. And at the last, without more ado, they flew away over the heath. Duck, who liked to sleep in the open air and had stayed in the yard, heard them going away, made herself merry and found down which she swam, and was much quicker way of travelling than being harnessed to a carriage. The host did not get out of bed for 2 hours after this. He washed himself, and wanted, but then he went to his face, and made a red streak from one ear to the other. And after this he went into the kitchen, and wanted to light a pipe. But when he came to the hearth, the eggshell darted into his eyes. "This morning everything attacks my head," said he, and angrily sat down in his grandfather's chair. But he quickly started up again, and cried, "Woe is me! but the needle had pricked him still worse than the pin, and not in the head. Now he was thoroughly angry, and suspected the guests who had come so late the night before, and when he went and looked about for them, they were gone. Then he made a vow to take no more ragamuffins into his house, for they consume much, pay for nothing, and play mischievous tricks of gratitude. There you go. What was the other one we wanted to read? The Girl Without Hands. Oh, hey Claire. Sorry, I didn't realize you were messaging in the chat. I did draw Steve the Duck performing a coup. Girl, she got no hands. Yes. There's definitely some like strong themes going on in these stories. It's an interesting one. Girl Without Hands, page 202. I don't think I've ever actually read this one before, so this will be the first time for all of us hearing this one, except for, I guess, the people who suggested it. Okay. A certain miller had little by little fallen into poverty, and had nothing left but his mill and a large apple tree behind it. Once, when he had gone into the forest to fetch wood, an old man stepped up to him and said, "Why dost thou plague thyself with cutting wood? I will make thee rich, if thou wilt promise me what is standing behind thy mill." "What can that be but my apple tree?" thought the miller, and said yes, and gave a written promise to the stranger. He, however, laughed mockingly, and said, "When 3 years have passed, I will come and carry away what belongs to me." And then he went. And when the miller got home, his wife came to meet him, and said, "Tell me, miller, from whence comes this sudden wealth into our house? All at once every box and chest was filled. No one brought it in, and I know not how it happened." He answered, "It comes from a stranger who met me in the forest. I, then, have promised him what stands behind the mill. We can very well give him the big apple tree for it." "Ah, husband," said the terrified wife, "that must have been the devil. He did not mean the apple tree, but our daughter, who was standing behind the mill, sweeping the yard." The miller's daughter was a beautiful, pious girl, and lived through the 3 years in fear of God and without sin. When, therefore, the time was over, and the day came when the evil one was to fetch her, she washed herself clean and made a circle round herself with chalk. The devil appeared quite early, but he could not come near to her. Angrily he said to the miller, "Take all water away from her. She may no longer be able to wash herself, for otherwise I have no power over her." He was afraid and did so. The next morning the devil came again, but she had wept on her hands, and they were quite clean. And again he could not get near her, and furiously said to the miller, "Cut her hands off, or else I cannot get the better of her." The miller was shocked, and answered, "How could I cut off my own child's hands?" And then the evil one threatened him, and said, "If thou dost not do it, thou art mine, and I will take thee myself." The father became alarmed, and promised to obey him. So he went to the girl, and said, "My child, if I do not cut off both thine hands, the devil will carry me away, and in my terror I have promised to do it. How am I do?" She replied, "Dear father, do with me what you will, I am your child." Thereupon she laid down both her hands, and let them be cut off. The devil came for the third time, but she had wept so long and so much on the stumps that after all they were quite clean, and he had to give in and had lost all right over her. The miller said to her, "I have by means of thee received such great wealth that I will keep thee most delicately as long as thou livest." But she replied, "Here I cannot stay. I will go forth, and compassionate people will give me as much as I require." Thereupon she caused her maimed arm. At sunrise she set out on her way, and walked the whole day until night fell. Then she came to a royal garden, and by the shimmering of the moon she saw that trees covered with beautiful fruits grew in it. But she could not enter, for there was much water round about it. And as she had walked the whole day, and had not eaten one mouthful, and hunger tormented her, she thought, "Ah, if I were but inside, that I might eat of the fruit, else I might die of hunger." And then she knelt down, and called on God the Lord, and prayed. And suddenly an angel came towards her, who made a dam in the water, so that the moat became dry, and she might walk through it. The angel with her. She saw a tree covered with beautiful pears, but they were all counted. and then she went with them, and to still her hunger, ate one with her mouth from the tree, but no more. The gardener was watching, but as the angel was standing by, he was afraid, and thought the maiden was a spirit, and was silent, neither did he dare to cry out, or to speak to the spirit. When she had eaten the pear she was satisfied, and went and concealed herself among the bushes. And the king to whom the garden belonged came down to it the next morning, and counted, and saw that one of the pears was missing, and asked the gardener what had become of it, as it was not lying beneath the tree, but was. Then answered the gardener, "Last night a spirit came in, who had no hands, and ate off one of the pears with his mouth." The king said, "How did the spirit get over the water? And where did it go after it had eaten the pear?" The gardener answered, Someone came in a snow white garment from heaven, who made a dam and kept back the water, that the spirit might cross through the moat. As it must have been an angel, I was afraid and asked no questions, and did not cry out. When the spirit had eaten the pear, it went back again. The king said, "If it be as thou sayest, I will watch with thee tonight." When it grew dark, the king came into the garden and brought a priest with him. And all three seated themselves beneath the tree and watched. At midnight the maiden came creeping out of the thicket, and went to the tree, and again ate one pear off it with her mouth. And beside her stood the angel in white garments. And then the priest went out to them and said, "Comest thou from heaven or from earth? Art thou a spirit or a human being?" She replied, "I am no spirit, but an unhappy mortal, deserted by all but God." And the king said, "If thou art forsaken by all the world, yet will I not forsake thee." He took her with him into his royal palace, and she was so beautiful and good, he loved her with all his heart, had silver hands made for her, and took her to be his wife. After a year, the king had to take the field, so he commanded his young queen to the care of his young. So he commanded his young queen to the care of his mother, and said, "If she is brought to bed, take care of her, nurse her well, and tell me if at once in a letter." Then she gave birth to a fine boy, and so the old mother made haste to write and announce the joyful news to him. But the messenger rested by a brook on the way, and as he was fatigued by the great distance, he fell asleep. And then came the devil, who was always seeking to injure the good queen, and exchanged the letter for another, in which was written that the queen had brought a monster into the world. And the king read the letter shocked and much troubled, but he wrote in answer that they were to take great care of the queen, and nurse her well until his arrival. The messenger went back with the letter, but rested at the same place, and again fell asleep. Then came the devil once more, and put a different letter in his pocket, in which was written that they were to put the queen and her child to death. The old mother was terribly shocked when she received the letter, and could not believe it. She wrote back again to the king, but received no other answer, because each time the devil substituted a false letter, and in the last letter it was also written that she was to preserve the queen's tongue and eyes as a token that she had obeyed. But the old mother wept to think such innocent blood was to be and her hind walked by night and cut out her tongue and eyes and kept them. And then she said to the queen, "I cannot have thee killed as the king commands, but here thou mayst stay no longer. Go forth into the wide world with thy child, and never come here again." The poor woman tied her child on her back, and went away with eyes full of tears. She came into a great wild forest, and then she fell on her knees and prayed to God, and the angel of the Lord appeared to her, and led her to a little house, on which was a sign with the words, "Here all dwell free." Snow White Maiden came out of the little house, and said, "Welcome, Lady Queen," and conducted her inside. And then they lay from her, and held to her breast, that he might feed, and laid him in a beautifully made little bed. And then said the poor woman, "From whence knowest thou that I was a queen?" The White Maiden answered, "I am an angel sent by God, to watch over thee and thy child." The queen stayed 7 years in the little house, and was well cared for, and by God's grace, because of her piety, her hands which had been cut off grew once more. At last the king came home again from the war, and his first wish was to see his wife and the child. Then his aged mother began to weep, and said, "Thou wicked man, why didst thou write to me that I was to take those 2 innocent lives?" And she showed him the 2 letters, and continued, "I did as thou badest me." And she showed the tokens, the tongue and the eyes. Then the king began to weep for his poor wife and his little son, so much more bitterly than she was doing, that the aged mother had compassion on him, and said, "Be at peace, she still lived. I secretly caused a hind to be killed, and took these tokens from it. But I bound the child to thy wife's back, and bade her go forth into the wide world, and made her promise never to come back here again, because thou wert so angry with her." Then spake the king, I will go as far as the sky is blue, and will neither eat nor drink, till I have found again my dear wife and my child. In the meantime they have not been killed or died of hunger. Thereupon the king travelled about for 7 long years, and sought her in every cleft of the rocks and in every cave, but he found her not, and thought she had died of want. And during the whole of this time he neither ate nor drank, but God supported him. At length he came into a great forest, and found therein the little house, whose sign was Here all dwell free. Then forth came the white maiden, and took him by the hand, and led him in, and said, Welcome, Lord King, and asked him from whence he came. He answered, Soon shall I have travelled and I seek my wife and her child, but cannot find them. The angel offered him meat and drink, but he did not take anything, and only wished to rest a little. Then he lay down to sleep, and put a handkerchief over his face. Thereupon the angel went into the chamber where the queen sat with her son, whom she usually called Sorrowful, and said to her, Go out with thy child, thy husband hath come. So she went to the place where he lay, and the handkerchief fell from his face. And then said she, Sorrowful, pick up thy father's handkerchief and cover his face again. The child picked it up and put it over his face again, and the king in his sleep heard what passed, and had pleasure in letting the handkerchief fall once more. The child grew impatient and said, Dear mother, how can I cover my father's face when I have no father in this world? I have learnt to say the prayer, Our Father which art in heaven, and thou hast told me that my father was in heaven, and was the good God, and how can I know a wild man like this? He is not my father. When the king heard that, he got up and asked who they were. And then she said, I am thy wife, and that is thy son, Sorrowful. And he saw her living hands, and said, My wife had silver hands. And she answered, The good God has caused my natural hands to grow again. And the angel went into the inner room, and brought the silver hands, and showed them to him. Whereupon he knew for certainty that it was his dear child, and he stood and was glad, and said, A heavy stone has fallen off of my heart. And then the angel of God gave them one meal with her. And after that they went home to the king's aged mother. There were great rejoicings everywhere, and the king and queen were married again, and lived contently to their happy end. Yeah, like it's always weird when like the devil is in these stories, right? Because it's like doing such mundane things. It's like you know a bit more power, I guess, or something to do. Anyway, was there another one that we wanted to read after this? All right, I'm just gonna pick one at random then. I think. Okay, so there's like 3 in a row. It's like Godfather Death and Death's Messengers and The Godfather, and I kind of want to read them just because spooky. Something else. I want to get the devil drawn onto my car. Do you have a car? The spoops. And these are like really far at the back of the book as well. Alright, okay. Godfather Death. A poor man had 12 children, and was forced to work night and day to give them even bread. When therefore he knew not what to do in his trouble, but ran out into the great highway, and resolved to ask the first person whom he met to be godfather. The first to meet him was the good God, who already knew what filled his heart, and said to him, Poor man, I pity thee. I will hold thy child at its christening, and will take charge of it, and make it happy on earth. And the man said, Who art thou? I am God. Then I do not desire to have thee for a godfather, said the man. Thou givest to the rich, and leavest the poor to hunger. Thus spoke the man, for he did not know how wisely God apportions riches and poverty. He turned therefore away from the Lord, and went farther. Then the devil came to him, and said, What seekest thou? If thou wilt take me as a godfather for thy child, I will give him gold in plenty, and all the joys of the world as well. And the man asked, Who art thou? I am the devil. Then I do not desire to have thee for godfather, said the man, thou deceivest men, and lead them astray. He went onwards, and then came Death, striding up to him with withered legs, and said, Take me as a godfather. The man asked, Who art thou? I am Death, and I make all equal. Then said the man, Thou art the right one. Thou takest the rich as well as the poor, without distinction. Thou shalt be godfather. Death answered, I will make thy child rich and famous, for he who has me as a friend can lack nothing. And the man said, Next Sunday is the christening. Be there at the right time. Death appeared as he had promised, and stood godfather quite in the usual way. When the boy had grown up, his godfather one day appeared and bade him go with him. He led him forth into the forest, and showed him a herb which grew there, and said, Now shalt thou receive thy godfather's present. I make thee a celebrated physician. When thou art called to a patient, I will always appear to thee. If I stand by the head of the sick man, thou mayst say with confidence that thou wilt make him well again, and if thou givest him this herb, he will recover. But if I stand by the patient's feet, he is mine, and thou must say that all remedies are in vain, and that no physician in the world could save him. But beware of using the herb against my will, or it might fare ill with thee. It was not long before the youth was the most famous physician in the whole world. He had only to look at the patient, and he knew his conditions at once, and if he would recover or must needs die. So they said of him, and from far and wide people came to him, sent for him when they had anyone ill, and would give him so much money that he soon became a rich man. Now it so befell that the king became ill, and the physician was summoned, and was to say if recovery was possible. But when he came to the bed, Death was standing by the feet of the sick man, and the herb did not grow which could save him. If I could but cheat Death for once, thought the physician. He is sure to take it ill if I do, but as I am his godson, he will shut one eye. I will risk it. He therefore took up the sick man, and laid him the other way, so that now Death was standing by his head. And then he gave the king some of the herb, and he recovered and grew healthy again. But Death came to the physician, looking very black and angry, and threatened him with his finger, and said, Thou hast overreached me. This time I will pardon it, as thou art my godson. But if thou venturest it again, it will cost thee thy neck, for I will take thee myself away with me. Soon afterwards, the king's daughter fell to a severe illness. She was his only child, and he wept day and night, so that he began to lose the sight of his eyes. And he caused it to be made known that whosoever rescued her from death should be her husband and inherit the crown. When the physician came to the sick girl's bed, he saw Death by her feet. He ought to have remembered the warning given by his godfather, but he was so infatuated by the great beauty of the king's daughter, and the happiness of becoming her husband, that he flung all thought to the winds. He did not see that Death was casting angry glances at him. He was raising his hand in the air and threatening him with his withered fist. He raised up the sick girl, placed her placed her head where her feet had lain, and then he gave her some of the herb, and instantly her cheeks flushed red, and life stirred afresh in her. When Death saw that for the second time he was defrauded of his own property, he walked up to the physician with long strides, and said, All is over with thee, and now the lot falls on thee, and seized him so firmly with his ice-cold hand that he could not resist, and led him into a cave below the earth. There he saw how thousands and thousands of candles were burning in countless rows, some large, others half-sized, others small. Every instant some were extinguished, and others again burnt up, so that all the flames seemed to leap hither and thither in perpetual change. See, said Death, these are the lights of men's lives. The large ones belong to children, the half-sized ones to married people in their prime, the little ones belong to old people, but children and young folks, likewise, have often only a tiny candle. Show me the light of my life, said the physician, and he thought that it would still be very tall. Death pointed to a little end, which was just threatening to go out, and said, Behold, it is there. Ah, dear godfather, said the horrified physician, light a new one for me. Do it for love of me, that I may enjoy my life, be king and the husband of the king's beautiful daughter. I cannot, answered Death. One must go out before a new one is lighted. Then place the old one on a new one. It will go on burning at once when the old one has come to an end, pleaded the physician. Death behaved as if he were going to fulfill his wish, and took hold of the tall new candle. But as he desired to revenge himself, purposely made a mistake in fixing it, and the little piece fell down and was extinguished, and immediately the physician fell on the ground, and now he himself was in the hands of death. Spooky. Oh, hang on. This is true, yeah. The devil is an honest man. At least in Grimm's fairy tales. Alright. Death's messengers. I'm just gonna go with the death themed ones. I feel like it's appropriate, you know. In ancient times, a giant was once travelling on a great highway, when suddenly an unknown man sprang up before him and said, "Halt! Not one step further." "What?" cried the giant. "A creature whom I can crush between my fingers wants to block my way. Who art thou that darest to speak so boldly?" "I am Death," answered the other. "No one resists me, and thou also must obey my commands." But the giant refused and began to struggle with Death. It was a long, violent battle. At last the giant got the upper hand and struck Death down with his fist, so that he dropped by a stone. The giant went on his way, and Death lay there conquered, and so weak that he could not get up again. "What will be done now," said he, "if I stay lying here in a corner? No one will die in the world, and it will get so full of people that they won't have room to stand beside each other." In the meantime, a young man came along the road, who was strong and healthy, singing a song and glancing around on every side. When he saw the half-fainting one, he went compassionately to him, raised him up, poured a strengthening draught out of his flask for him, and waited till he came round. "Dost thou know," said the stranger, whilst he was getting up again, "who I am, and who it is whom thou hast helped on his legs again?" "No," answered the youth, "I do not know thee." "I am Death," said he. "I spare no one, and can make no exception with thee. But thou mayest see that I am grateful. I promise thee I will not fall on thee unexpectedly, but will send my messengers to thee before I can come and take thee away." "Well," said the youth, "it is something gained that I shall know when thou comest. But at any rate, be safe from thee for so long." Then he went on his way, and was light-hearted and enjoyed himself, and lived without thought. But youth and health did not last long, and soon came sickness and sorrows, which tormented him by day, and took away his rest by night. "Die I shall not," said he to himself, "for Death will send his messengers before that. But I do wish these wretched days of sickness were over." As soon as he felt himself well again, he began once more to live merrily. And then one day someone tapped him on the shoulder. He looked round, and Death stood behind him, and said, "Follow me. The hour of thy departure from this world has come." "What?" replied the man. "Wilt thou break thy word? Didst thou not promise me that thou wouldst send thy messengers to me before coming thyself? I have seen none." "Silence," answered Death. "Have I not sent one messenger to thee after another? Did not fever come and smite thee, and shake thee and cast thee down? Has dizziness not bewildered thy head? Has not gout twitched thee in all thy limbs? Did not thine ears sing? Did not toothache bite into thy cheeks? Was it not dark before thine eyes? And besides all that, has not my own brother Sleep reminded thee every night of me? Didst thou not lie by night as if thou wert already dead?" The man could make no answer. He yielded to his fate, and went away with Death. Get out of death, free card. Oh man. There's one called The Godfather, but I don't think it's death themed. I also feel like it's probably very different to the film. um, any other suggestions? The Pied Piper? I will check. I don't know if it's in this one. I feel like it should be. Mm. No, it doesn't seem to be in here. If anyone wants to check what ones are in here, by the way, this is the 2012 Barnes and Noble Collector's Edition. Um, I love that. Not death, but still good. I kind of want that out of context on a t-shirt. It's quite difficult to tell from a lot of these titles what it's actually about. Like it'll be titled something like, Ferdinand the Faithful, and I'm like, don't know what that is. I can read some of the hands ones. There's a couple of those. There's strong hands, clever hands, hands in luck, hands married. Mystery. It is definitely mysterious. Slightly unhelpful, but mysterious. Oh, I could do Hansel and Gretel. That's a fun one. Eating children. Classic. I would like to point out, though, that Hansel and Gretel in this book is preceded by a story called Gambling Hansel. Alright. Children being eaten is definitely tonight's theme. Children being eaten and children being murdered by their step-parents. Alright. Actually, should I start with Gambling Hansel and then do Hansel and Gretel, just as like a little lead-in? Have a good recipe for children's stew. Oh no. You're definitely not allowed to make that in our flat. It consists of children and stew. Gretel's not gambling, but there is one about Gretel a little bit back. Hang on. There's Clever Gretel, and then one called Our Lady's Child, and then Gambling Hansel, and then Hansel and Gretel. Alright, I'm gonna start with Gambling Hansel, and then we can go on from there. Once upon a time, there was a man who did nothing but gamble, and for that reason, people never called him anything but Gambling Hansel. Makes sense. As he never ceased to gamble, he played away his house and all that he had. Now, the very day before his creditors were to take his house from him, came the Lord and St. Peter, and asked for him to give them shelter for the night. Then Gambling Hansel said, "For my part, you may stay the night, but I cannot give you a bed or anything to eat." And so the Lord said he was just to take them in, and they themselves would buy something to eat, to which Gambling Hansel made no objection. Thereupon St. Peter gave him 3 groschen, and said he was to go to the baker's and fetch some bread. This is definitely not Hansel from Hansel and Gretel, but we're sticking with it. So Gambling Hansel went, but when he reached the house where the other gambling vagabonds were gathered together, they, although they had won all they had, greeted him clamorously. Had won all that he had, sorry. Greeted him clamorously and said, "Hansel, do come in." "Oh," said he, "do you want to win the 3 groschen too?" On this they would not let him go, so he went in and played away the 3 groschen also. Meanwhile, St. Peter and the Lord were waiting, and as he was so long in coming, they set out to meet him. When Gambling Hansel came, however, he pretended that the money had fallen into the gutter, and kept raking about in it, all the while to find it. But our Lord already knew that he had lost it in play. St. Peter again gave him 3 groschen, and now told him that now that he did not allow himself to be led away once more, but fetched them the loaf. Our Lord then inquired if he had no wine, and he said, Alack, sir, all the casks are empty. But the Lord said he was to go down into the cellar, for the best wine was still there. For a long time he would not believe this, but at length he said, Well, I will go down, but I know that there is none in there. When he turned the tap, however, lo and behold, the best of wine ran out, and he took it to them, and the two passed the night there. Early the next day, our Lord told Gambling Hansel that he might beg 3 favours. The Lord expected he would ask to go to heaven, but Gambling Hansel asked for a pack of cards with which he could win everything, for dice with which he would win everything, and for a tree whereupon every kind of fruit would grow, and from which no one who had climbed up could descend until he bade him to do so. The Lord gave him all that he had asked, and departed with St. Peter. And now Gambling Hansel at once set about gambling in real earnest, but before long he had gained half the world. Upon this, St. Peter said to the Lord, Lord, this thing must not go on. He will win, and thus lose, and thou lose the whole world. We must send Death to him. When Death appeared, Gambling Hansel had just seated himself at the gaming table, and Death said, Hansel, come out a while. But Gambling Hansel said, Just wait a little until the game is done, and in the meantime, get up into that tree out there and gather a little fruit, that we may have something to munch on our way. Thereupon Death climbed up, but when he wanted to come down again, he could not, and Gambling Hansel left him up there for 7 years, during which time no one died. And so St. Peter said to the Lord, Lord, this thing must not go on. People no longer die. We must go ourselves. And they went themselves, and the Lord commanded Hansel to let Death come down again. So Hansel went at once to Death, and said to him, Come down. And Death took him directly, and put an end to him. They went away together, and came into the next world. And then Gambling Hansel made straight for the door of heaven, and knocked at it. Who's there? Gambling Hansel. Ah, we will have nothing to do with him. Begone. And so he went to the door of purgatory, and knocked once more. Who's there? Gambling Hansel. Ah, there is quite enough weeping and wailing here without him. We do not want to gamble. Just go away again. Then he went to the door of hell, and there they let him in. There was, however, no one at home but old Lucifer, and the crooked devils who had just been doing their evil work in the world. And no sooner was Hansel there, than he sat down to gamble again. Lucifer, however, had nothing to lose but his misshapen devils, and Gambling Hansel won them from him, as with his cards he could not fail to do so. And now he was off again with his crooked devils, and they went to Hollingford, and pulled up a hot pole, and with it went to heaven and began to thrust the pole against it, and heaven began to crack. So again St. Peter said, Lord, this thing cannot go on. We must let him in, or he will throw us down from heaven. And they let him in. But Gambling Hansel instantly began to play again, and there was such a noise and confusion that there was no hearing what they themselves were thinking. Therefore St. Peter once more said, Lord, this cannot go on. We must throw him down, or he will make all heaven rebellious. So they went to him at once, and threw him down, and his soul broke into fragments, and went into the gambling vagabonds who are living to this day. I love that this man, gambled his entire life, dies, is literally sent to hell for gambling, and is just like, yeah, I can win the devils though. It is pretty good, to be fair. Also, yeah, incredibly disappointing to only find Lucifer in hell. How dare they? I was expecting so much more. Alright. So now that we have read a completely unrelated story about someone called Hansel, which I should have realised, given, this book, I'm going to read Hansel and Gretel next. Actually, first I'm going to finish my tea, because it's, genuinely gone really cold now. That's the good thing about peppermint tea. It doesn't really, start to taste awful when you just leave it for hours. Okay. Hansel and Gretel. Hard by a great forest dwelt a poor willow. Oh my gosh. All of my words are gone. Gonna start that again. Hard by a great wood forest dwelt a poor woodcutter with his wife and his 2 children. The boy was called Hansel, and the girl Gretel. He had little to bite and to break, and once, when great scarcity fell on the land, he could no longer procure daily bread. Now, when he thought over this, by night in his bed, and tossed about in his anxiety, he groaned and said to his wife, "What is to become of us? How are we to feed our poor children, when we no longer have anything even for ourselves?" "I'll tell you what, husband," said the woman. "Early tomorrow morning we will take the children out into the forest, to where it is the thickest, and we will light a fire for them, and give each of them 1 piece of bread more, and then we will go to our work, and leave them alone, and they will not find the way home again, and we shall be rid of them." "No, wife," said the man, "I will not do that. How can I bear to leave my children alone in the forest? The wild animals would soon come and tear them to pieces." "Oh, thou fool," said she, "then we must all 4 die of hunger. Thou mayest as well plane the planks for our coffins." And she left him no peace until he consented. "But I feel very sorry for the poor children, all the same," said the man. The 2 children had also not been able to sleep for hunger, and had heard what their stepmother had said to their father. And Gretel wept bitter tears, and said to Hansel, "Now all is over with us." "Be quiet, Gretel," said Hansel. "Do not distress thyself. I will soon find a way to help us." And when the old folks had fallen asleep, he got up and put on his little coat, and opened the door below, and crept outside. The moon shone brightly, and the white pebbles which lay in front of the house glittered like real silver pennies. Hansel stooped and put as many of them in the little pocket of his coat as he could possibly get in. Then he went back and said to Gretel, "Be comforted, dear little sister, and sleep in peace. God will not forsake us." And he lay down again in his bed. When day dawned, but before the sun had risen, the woman came and awoke the 2 children, saying, "Get up, you sluggards. We are going into the forest to fetch wood." She gave each a little piece of bread, and said, "There is something for your dinner, but do not eat it up before then, for you will get nothing else." Gretel took the bread under her apron, as Hansel had the stones in his pocket, and then they all set out together on the way to the forest. When they had walked a short time, Hansel stood still, and peeped back at the house, and did so again and again. And his father said, "Hansel, what art thou looking at there, and standing behind for? Mind what thou art about, and do not forget how to use thy legs." "Ah, father," said Hansel, "I am looking at my little white cat, which is sitting up on the roof, and which wants to say good-bye to me." The wife said, "Fool, that is not thy little cat, that is the morning sun which is shining on the chimneys." Hansel, however, had not been looking back at the cat, but had been constantly throwing one of the white pebble stones out of his pocket on the road. Now, when they had reached the middle of the forest, the father said, "Now, children, pile up some wood, and I will light a fire that you may not be cold." Hansel and Gretel gathered brushwood together, as high as a little hill. The brushwood was lighted, and when the flames were burning very high, the woman said, "Now, children, lay yourselves down by the fire and rest. We will go into the forest and cut some wood, and when we have done, we will come back and fetch you away." Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and when noon came, each ate a little piece of bread, and as they heard the strokes of the wood axe, they believed that their father was near. It was not, however, the axe. It was a branch which he had fastened to the withered tree, which the wind was blowing backwards and forwards. And as they had been sitting such a long time, their eyes shut with fatigue, and they fell fast asleep. When at last they awoke, it was already dark night. Gretel began to cry, and said, "How are we to get out of the forest?" And said, "Just wait a little, until the moon has risen, and then we shall soon find the way." And when the full moon had risen, Hansel took his little sister by the hand, and followed the pebbles which shone like newly coined silver pieces, and showed them the way. They walked all night long, and by the break of day came once more to their father's house. They knocked at the door, and when the woman opened it and saw that it was Hansel and Gretel, she said, "You naughty children, why have you slept so long in the forest? We thought you were never coming back at all." Their father, however, rejoiced, for it had cut him to the heart to leave them behind alone. Not long afterwards, there was once more great scarcity in all parts, and the children heard their mother saying that night to their father, "Everything is eaten again, and we have 1/2 loaf left, and after that there is an end. The children must go." We will take them further into the wood, so that they will not find their way out again. There is no other means of saving ourselves." The man's heart was heavy, and thought, "It would be better for thee to share thy last mouthful with thy children." The woman, however, would listen to nothing that he had to say, but scolded and reproached him. He who says A must say B. Likewise, as he had yielded the first time, he had to do so a second time also. The children were, however, still awake, and had heard the conversation. And when the old folks were asleep, Hansel again got up and wanted to go out and pick up pebbles as he had done before, but the woman had locked the door, and Hansel could not get out. Nevertheless, he comforted his sister, and said, "Do not cry, Gretel. Go to sleep quietly, and the good God will help us." Early in the morning came the woman, and took the children out of their beds. Their bit of bread was given to them, but it was still smaller than the time before. On the way to the forest, Hansel crumbled his in his pocket, and often stood still and threw a morsel on the ground. "Hansel, why dost thou stop and look around?" asked the father. "Go on." "I am looking back at my little pigeon which is sitting on the roof, and wants to say good-bye to me," answered Hansel. "Simpleton," said the woman, "that is not thy pigeon, that is the morning sun that is shining on the chimney." Hansel, however, little by little threw all the crumbs on the path. The woman led the children still deeper into the forest, where they had never in their lives been before. Then a great fire was again made, and the mother said, "Just sit there, you children, and when you are tired you may sleep a little. We are going into the forest to cut wood, and in the evening when we are done we will come and fetch you away." When it was noon, Gretel shared her piece of bread with Hansel, who had scattered his by the way. Then they fell asleep, and evening came and went, but no one came to the poor children. They did not awake until it was dark night, and Hansel comforted his sister and said, "Just wait, Gretel, until the moon rises, and then we shall see the crumbs of bread which I have strewn about, and they will show us our way back home again." When the moon came they set out, but they found no crumbs, for the many thousands of birds which fly about the woods and fields had picked them all up. And Hansel said to Gretel, "We shall soon find the way," but they didn't find it. They walked the whole night, and all the next day too, from morning till evening, but they did not get out of the forest, and they were very hungry, for they had nothing to eat but 2 or 3 berries which grew on the ground, and as they were so weary that their legs could carry them no longer, they lay down beneath a tree and fell asleep. It was now 3 mornings since they had left their father's house. They began to walk again, but they always got deeper into the forest, and if help did not come soon, they must die of hunger or weariness. When it was midday, they saw a beautiful snow-white bird sitting on a bough, which sang so delightfully, they stood still and listened to it. When it had finished its song, it spread its wings and flew away before them, and they followed it until they reached a little house, on the roof of which it alighted. And when they came quite up to the little house, they saw that it was built of bread and covered with cakes, but that the windows were of clear sugar. "We will set to work on that," said Hansel, "and have a good meal. I will eat a bit of the roof, and thou, Gretel, canst have some of the window. It will taste sweet." Hansel reached up above and broke off a little of the roof to try how it tasted, and Gretel leaned across against the window and nibbled at the panes, and then a soft voice cried from the gloom, "Nibble, nibble, gnaw, who is nibbling at my little house?" And the children answered, the wind, the heaven-born wind," and went on eating without disturbing themselves. Hansel, who thought the roof tasted very nice, poured down a great piece of it, and Gretel pushed out the whole of one round window pane, sat down, and enjoyed herself with it. And suddenly the door opened. A very, very old woman, who supported herself on crutches, came creeping out. Hansel and Gretel were so terribly frightened that they let fall what they had in their hands. The old woman, however, nodded her head, and said, "Oh, you dear children, what has brought you here? Do come in and stay with me. No harm shall happen to you." She took them both by the hand and led them into her little house. Then good food was set before them, milk and pancakes, with sugar, apples, and nuts. And afterwards 2 little beds were covered with clean white linen, and Hansel and Gretel lay down in them, and thought they were in heaven. The old woman had only pretended to be so kind. She was, in reality, a wicked witch, who lay in wait for children, and had only built the little house of bread in order to entice When a child fell into her power, she killed it, cooked, and ate it. And that was a feast day with her. Witches have red eyes and cannot see far, but they have a keen scent like the beasts, and are aware when human beings draw near. When Hansel and Gretel came into her neighbourhood, she laughed maliciously, and said mockingly, "I have them. They shall not escape me again." Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she was already up, and when she saw both of them sleeping and looking so pretty, with their plump red cheeks, she muttered to herself, "That will be a dainty mouthful." And then she seized Hansel with her shrivelled hand, carried him into a little stable, and shut him in with a gated door. Oh, by the way, another amazing illustration. I really, really love these books, in case you hadn't noticed. Anyway. He might scream as he liked, that was of no use. Then she went to Gretel, and shook her till she awoke, and cried, "Get up, lazy thing, fetch some water and cook something for thy brother. He is in the stable outside, and is to be made fat, and when he is fat, I will eat him." And Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was all in vain. She was forced to do what the wicked witch ordered her, and now the best food was cooked for poor Hansel, but Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Every morning the woman crept to the little stable, and cried, "Hansel, stretch out thy finger, that I may feel if thou wilt soon be fat." And Hansel, however, stretched out a little bone to her, and the old woman, who had dim eyes and could not see it, and thought it was Hansel's finger, and was astonished that there was no way of fattening him. When 4 weeks had gone by and Hansel still continued thin, she was seized with impatience and would not wait any longer. "Hello, Gretel," she called to the girl. "Be active and bring some water. Let Hansel be fat or thin. Tomorrow I will kill him and cook him." Ah, how the poor little sister did lament when she had to fetch the water, and how her tears did flow down over her cheeks. "Dear God, do help us," she cried. "If the wild beasts in the forest had but devoured us, we should at any rate have died together." "Just keep thy noise to thyself," said the old woman. "All that won't help thee at all." Early in the morning, Gretel had to go out and hang up the cauldron with the water, and light the fire. "We will bake first," said the old woman. "I have already heated the oven and kneaded the dough." She pushed poor Gretel out to the oven, from which flames of fire were already darting. "Creep in," said the witch, "and see if it is properly heated, so that we can shut the bread in." And when once Gretel was inside, she intended to shut the oven and let her bake in it, and then she would eat her too. But Gretel saw what she had in mind, and said, "I do not how I am to do it. How do you get in?" "Silly goose," said the woman, "the door is big enough, just look, I can get in myself." And she crept up and thrust her head into the oven. And then Gretel gave her a push that drove her far into it, and shut the iron door and fastened the bolt. Oh, and then she began to howl quite horribly, but Gretel ran away, and the godless witch was miserably burnt to death. Gretel, however, ran like lightning to Hansel, opened his little stable, and cried, "Hansel, we are saved, the old witch is dead." And then Hansel sprang out like a bird from its cage when the door was opened for it. How they did rejoice and embrace each other, and dance about, and as they had no longer any need to fear her, they went into the witch's house, and in every corner there stood chests full of pearls and jewels. "These are far better than pebbles," said Hansel, and thrust into his pockets whatever could be got in. And Gretel said, "I too will take something home with me," and filled her pinafore full. "But now we will go away," said Hansel, "that we may get out of the witch's forest." When they had walked for 2 hours, they came to a great piece of water. "We cannot get over," said Hansel. "I see no footplank and no bridge." "And no boat crosses either," answered Gretel. "But a white duck is swimming there. If I ask her, she will help us over." And then she cried, little duck, dost thou see? Hansel and Gretel are waiting for thee. There's never a plank or a bridge in sight. Take us across on thy back so white." And the duck came to them, and Hansel seated himself on its back, and told his sister to sit by him. "No," replied Gretel, "that will be too heavy for the little duck. She shall take us across one after the other." The good little duck did so, and when they were once safely across and had walked for a short time, the forest seemed to be more and more familiar to them, and at length they saw from afar their father's house. Then they began to run, rushed into the parlour, and threw themselves into their father's arms. The man had not known one happy hour since he had left the children in the forest, and the woman, however, was dead. Gretel emptied her pinafore until pearls and precious stones ran about the room, another to add to them. Then all anxiety was at an end, and they lived together in perfect happiness. My tale is done. There runs a mouse. Whosoever catches it may make himself a big fur cap out of it. The end. All the Hansels. Oh, yeah, if you want more illustrations, there's Hansel in a cage and the witch being about to be pushed into a fire. So I love that that one just ended with like a All right, I'll do one more, I think, and then I'll call it a night because it is 10 o'clock. Um, what would be a good one to end on? Pieces. I will check. Um. Yes, there is. The shoes that were danced to pieces. 350. You can, of course, call it a day if you would rather call it a day than call it a night. Okay. Oh yes, I think this is the 12 Dancing Princesses one. Alright, cool. We finally will get the 12 Dancing Princesses. A long time after I said I would read that one. Now that we've figured out which one it is. What a way to go. Okay. There was once upon a time a king who had 12 daughters, each one more beautiful than the other. They all slept together in one chamber, in which their beds stood side by side, and every night when they were in them, the king locked the door and bolted it. But in the morning, when he unlocked the door, he saw that their shoes were worn out with dancing, and no one could find out how that had come to pass. When the king caused it to be proclaimed that whosoever could discover where they danced at night should choose one of them for his wife and be king after his death, but that whosoever came forward and had not discovered it within 3 days and nights should have forfeited his life. I love how dramatic all of the kings are. It's like, oh, can you do the thing? No? Then you will perish. Anyway, it was not long before a king's son presented himself and offered to undertake the enterprise. He was well received, and in the evening was led into a room adjoining the princess's sleeping chamber. His bed was placed there, and he was to observe where they went and danced, and in order that they might do nothing secretly or go away to some other place, the door of their room was left open. But the eyelids of the prince grew heavy as lead, and he fell asleep. And when he awoke the next morning, all 12 had been to the dance, for their shoes were standing there with holes in the soles, and on the second and third nights it fell just the same. And then his head was struck off without mercy. Many others came after this, and undertook the enterprise, but all forfeited their lives. Now it came to pass that a poor soldier, who had a wound and could no longer serve, found himself on the road to the town where the king lived. There he met an old woman, who asked him where he was going. I hardly know myself, answered he, and added in jest, I had half a mind to discover where the princesses danced their shoes into holes, and thus become king. That is not so difficult, said the old woman. You must not drink the wine which will be brought to you at night. You must pretend to be sound asleep. And with that she gave him a little cloak, and said, if you put on that, you will be invisible, and then you can steal after the 12. When the soldier had received this good advice, he went into the thing in earnest, took heart, went to the king, and announced himself as a suitor. He was as well received as the others, and royal garments were put upon him. He was conducted that evening at bedtime into the antechamber, and as he was about to go to bed, the eldest came and brought him a cup of wine, but he had tied a sponge under his chin, and let the wine run down into it, without drinking a drop. And then he lay down, and when he had lain a while, he began to snore, as if in the deepest sleep. The 12 princesses heard that, and laughed, and the eldest said, he too might well have saved his life. With that they got up, opened wardrobes, presses, cupboards, and brought out pretty dresses, dressed themselves before the mirrors, sprang about and rejoiced at the prospect of the dance. Only the youngest said, I know not how it is, you are very happy. I know not how it is. You are very happy, but I feel very strange. Some misfortune is certainly about to befall us. Thou art a goose, who art always frightened, said the eldest. Hast thou forgotten how many kings' sons have already come here in vain? I had hardly any need to give the soldier a sleeping draught. In any case, the clown would not have awakened. When they were all ready, they looked carefully at the soldier, but he had closed his eyes and did not move or stir, so they felt themselves quite secure. The eldest then went to her bed and tapped it, and it immediately sank into the earth. One after the other they descended through the opening, the eldest going first. The soldier, who had watched everything, tarried no longer, but put on his little cloak, and went down the last with the youngest. Halfway down the steps, he just trod a little on her dress, and she was terrified at that, and cried out, "What is that? Who is pulling my dress?" "Don't be so silly," said the eldest. "You have caught it on a nail." Then they went all the way down, and when they were at the bottom, they were standing in a wonderfully pretty avenue of trees, all the leaves of which were silver and shone and glistened. And the soldier thought, "I must carry a token away with me," and broke off a twig from one of them, on which the tree cracked with a loud report. And the youngest cried out again, "Something is wrong. Did you hear the crack?" But the eldest said, "It is a gun fired for joy, because we have got rid of our prince so quickly." After that they came into an avenue, where all the leaves were of gold, and lastly into a third, where they were of bright diamonds. He broke off a twig from each, which made such a crack each time that the youngest started back in terror, but the eldest still maintained that they were salutes. They went on and came into a great lake, whereon stood 12 little boats, and in every boat sat a handsome prince, all of whom were waiting for the 12, and each took one of them with him, but the soldier seated himself by the youngest. Then her prince said, "I cannot tell why the boat is so much heavier today. I shall have to row with all my strength if I am to get across." "What should cause that?" said the youngest, "but the warm weather? I feel very warm too." On the opposite side of the lake stood a splendid, brightly lit castle, from whence resounded the joyous music of trumpets and kettledrums. They rowed over there, entered, and each prince danced with the girl he loved, but the soldier danced with them unseen. And then one of them had a cup of wine in her hand. He drank it up, so that the cup was empty when she carried it to her mouth. The youngest was alarmed at this, but the eldest always made her be silent. They danced there till 3 o'clock in the morning, when all the shoes were danced into holes, and they were forced to leave off. The princes rowed them back again over the lake, and this time the soldier seated himself by the eldest. On the shore they took leave of their princes, and promised to return the following night. When they reached the stairs, the soldier ran on in front, and lay down in his bed, and when the 12 had come up slowly and wearily, he was already snoring so loudly that they could all hear him. And they said, "So far as he is concerned, we are safe." They took off their beautiful dresses, laid them away, put the worn-out shoes under the bed, and lay down. Next morning, the soldier resolved not to speak, but to watch the wonderful goings-on, and again spend time with them. Then everything was done just as it had been done the first time, and each time they danced until their shoes were worn to pieces. But the third time, he took the cup away with him as a token. When the hour had arrived for him to give his answer, he took the 3 twigs and the cup, and went to the king. But the 12 stood behind the door, and listened for what he was going to say. When the king put the question, "Where have my 12 daughters danced their shoes to pieces in the night?" he answered, "In an underground castle with 12 princes," and related how it came to pass, and brought out the tokens. The king then summoned his daughters, and asked them if the soldier had told the truth. And when they saw that they were betrayed, and that falsehood would be of no avail, they were obliged to confess all. Whereupon the king asked which of them he would have to wife. He answered, "I am no longer young, so give me the eldest." And then they were celebrated until the kingdom was promised him after the king's death. But the princes were bewitched for as many days as they had danced nights with the 12. It's a gun fired by America. Honestly, calling people a goose as an insult it needs to come back. It needs to be a thing again. I am very much a fan. Also, I love that they were like, yes, we're in love with these 12 princes, and we don't want to marry whoever our dad wants us to. And the moral of the story was that one of them had to marry him anyway, and then all the princes got hexed. A+ parenting, good job, my guy. What, you egg? That is a really good insult. Calling people an egg and calling people a goose. Top tier insults. Very here for it. Need to bring those back. Also, sluggard for lazy people is an excellent insult that should never have gone out of fashion, to be honest. I'm very here for it. But yeah, so I think with that, I'll call an end to our evening of fairy tales. Um, you have to. That's true. You do have to stab someone if you're going to call them an egg. Those are the rules. I don't make the rules. Um, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed all the fairy tales. I hope you have a good evening, and I hope you'll join me again on Monday. I still haven't decided what I'm going to read on Monday. Might go back to some Sherlock Holmes. Might do, I don't know. These are not the only books I own. I own a lot more books, but these are the main ones that I have that I know are in the public domain. But if anyone has any suggestions, I guess like message me. I'll probably have a poll on Instagram at some point. Oh, we can do Sherlock again, yeah. I read Study in Scarlet last week, or not last week, on Monday. Oh, I could do Poe. That's a good shout. I should have read some Poe today. That would have been like A+ spooky vibes for Halloween. Um, the Bible of Cthulhu. I do have a set of Lovecraft books. Um, yeah, I don't know. At some point, I will get back to Sherlock. At least, if I don't do it on Monday, I'll probably do it next Friday. I'll read The Sign of the Four next. Um, but yeah. Educate me. One of the Teletubbies. Yes, Poe is one of the Teletubbies. That is correct. Poe is also the name of a gothic writer who is A+ spooky vibes. That's true. Yeah, I don't really want to read Lovecraft out loud because that's a bit yikes. Um, I already had to like skip over a couple things in Study in Scarlet because they were a bit yikes to read out loud. I feel like Lovecraft would just be a bit much. Um, but yeah, I'll look into it. I feel like Edgar Allan Poe would be a good one though. Like Telltale Heart or something would be really cool. Yeah, extremely like yikes. um, yeah, that was good. I do have Dante's Inferno, but I feel like that's like a lot, to be honest. It's very dense. Yes, I can't tell if that's to Telltale Heart or skip a few. Yeah, basically, yeah. Like there's not a lot of point. Um, yeah, I mean, I like Lovecraft stories. I think they're quite interesting to read. I wouldn't want to read them out loud, and they are very problematic in general. War and Peace is War and Peace in public domain. I mean, to be honest, it doesn't really matter if it's not. No one's really going to care about me reading to 8 people at a time. War and Peace. I'm not sure. Um, we shall see, I guess. That's fair. Yeah. Oh man, can't wait to read James Joyce on stream. All of those 8-page sentences. The entire encyclopedia. I mean, that would take a lot longer than a couple hours, to be fair. That would be like I really want to read some Oscar Wilde on stream at some point because like I love Oscar Wilde so much. I need to figure out what one would be good though. Ulysses read out loud would be interesting to say the least. Um, I've never actually managed to get through Ulysses though, like on my own. Start the stream and don't stop till I finish. Reading which one? The encyclopedia or Ulysses? Because they would probably take the same amount of time. I really want to finish Ulysses. But it's just so difficult to get through. I mostly want to read out of spite because um my uncle got it for me for Christmas one year and was basically like, I have never finished this book. Good luck. And now I kind of want to read it just to say I have read it, which is a terrible reason to want to read a book, to be honest, but whatever. All right. I am gonna say goodnight, friends. I hope you all have a lovely evening. Hope you enjoyed some bedtime stories. And yeah, have a spooky Halloween tomorrow. And I will hopefully see at least some of you on Monday. That is a cool candle. Thank you very much for noticing. Alright, night, guys.